Good evening, everyone. We are going to resume our conditional use hearings for the Mountain Trail Solar LLC application. And where we concluded the last hearing was with testimony by Mr. Hartman. And we are now, my understanding is that both Gwyneth Fowler and Scott Fowler have a case that they wish to present. And at this point, Ms. Fowler, will you be proceeding first?
Correct.
Okay.
But before we do that, I had a housekeeping thing I wanted to bring up.
Sure.
I noticed when I was reviewing the exhibits that the applicant Exhibit 1 claimed to have the application and the narrative with it, and I didn't see that in the Dropbox.
The
original application that was submitted.
Application and narrative is Board Exhibit 1.
I didn't see it in there either.
It may not. I don't know if it was or it wasn't, but it's this book that I have in my hand here. You're welcome to review this.
Okay.
I believe on the Dropbox page, you have to scroll all the way down and it's a separate item as far as Dropbox.
That may be the case. I just don't recall. I believe you. So it may, I'd have to double check. It's been several months since they were put up, so I don't, but I fairly certain, because we did have, it was supplied to us electronically, so I'm fairly certain that it is up on the Dropbox, but we can confirm.
Okay, thanks.
Are you ready to proceed, Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Okay. You may do so.
Yes. All right, Justin, could you zoom out on the slide a little bit? A little more. There you go. For those that do not know me, my name is Gwyneth Fowler. I've lived here since 1998. I moved here when I was a small child. This first slide here is a panoramic image taken off of Hess Road on November 11th of 2023. And before I proceed, can I have permission to hand out the physical exhibits to the board?
Please have one marked as part of the record, and then yes, you may.
All right, so I'm going to hand out multiple exhibits. The first one is going to be the slideshow. The second one is going to be the photo exhibit, which is basically the original photos that were used in the slideshow that I took. And then the third one is the sources that I used for my analysis. And then the next one is the NREL study.
May you, if you want to approach with your exhibit packet, and then we'll go off the record so we can mark these as separate exhibits. Okay, we can go back on the record and you can proceed.
All right, so this is going to be Exhibit Fowler 2, my slideshow. You also have Fowler 3, which is the photographs that I took, the original photographs. That's Fowler 3. Fowler 4 is the source document for my presentation. Fowler 5 is the NREL, 3 specific pages that I cited. And then as requested, I included Fowler 6, which is the NREL, the full technical paper. As requested, all of these files were submitted in advance to all parties, including the board, the supervisor, the applicant's attorney, the objector's counsel, and the individual pro se parties that I had contact information for. All right, so here we have slide 1. This is the character of my community. As I was saying earlier, I moved here in 1998 as a small child. I would describe the community as mostly farmland, agriculture. You'll see livestock such as chickens or cattle or cows or dairy cows or both. I'd also described it as being very rural. It's not like being in the city at all. I used to live near the outskirts of Philadelphia, so it's a very big difference living here compared to there. So this was a panoramic photo taken on November 14th at 143, facing north-northwest on Hess Road near Hess Court. You'll see Hess Court road sign there in the right-hand part of the image. The foreground is Gaspari's property. In the distance, which is kind of hard to see, it's in the upper left. That's Frederick's property in the distance with the alternating green fields next to Blyle Road, which again is on the left side of the image. And then the Sunday Farm is in the distance, kind of in the middle of the image. They have red buildings and blue silos. If this project were to be approved, in my opinion, this view would be lost forever. Justin, next slide, please.
Do you have a response to that objection?
Speculation.
It's my opinion. I'm testifying as a concerned citizen.
I think it's an opinion. I think that your objection goes to the weight, not the credibility. So we'll be admitted for that limited purpose, and will be given its due weight by the board.
All right, this is slide 2. This photo was taken on November 14th, again at 1:42 p.m., facing north on Hess Road. Gaspari's property is in the foreground, and the distant is the Sunday Farm. This is a regular image compared to the previous image, which was a panoramic. You can see some houses on Blyle Road in the upper left. The Sunday Farm's in the middle. Next slide, please. Again, this was taken on November 14th at 1:43 p.m., facing north-northwest on Hess Road. Gaspari's property is in the foreground. Frederick's property is in the distance. You can see the alternating green fields there in front of the water tower. Next slide, please. So I wanted to reference the Windsor Township zoning ordinances. Section 103, the purpose. I wanted to emphasize the fact that the ordinances are toward conserving the value of property and encouraging the most appropriate use of land throughout the municipality. And also the zoning ordinances are to promote public health, safety, morals, and the general welfare by achieving, among others, the following purposes and objectives for the development. Secure safety from fire, panic, and other dangers, encourage the most appropriate use of land, conserve the value of land and buildings, conserve prime agriculture land, and preserve natural, scenic, and historic values in the environment, and preserved forest, wetlands, aquifers, and floodplains. Next slide, please. Again, Windsor Township zoning ordinance, section 104, the minimum standards, talks about promotion of the public health, safety, and the general welfare of the residents and inhabitants of the municipality. Section 201, definitions, 201.4, shall or must is always mandatory. We also have the definitions for agriculture, floodplain, and intensive agriculture under section 201.8. Next slide, please. This photo, it was taken on November 14th at 1:46 p.m. facing north-northwest. It's part of Gaspari's property. As you can see, there is a form of erosion on his farm. It's hard to see from this angle, which we'll see in the next few slides, but that's actually going downhill. It's facing south to north. Next slide, please. This is another side view of that same erosion area. This was taken on November 14th at 1:45 p.m. facing northwest. I did want to note, I did crop off a little bit of the sky in the original photo so I could get it to fit on the slide, but the original photo is in Fowler Exhibit 3. Next slide. All right, this is another panoramic photo, again, also taken on November 14th. You can see the road there is Hess Road. It's Gaspari's farm there on the right. As you can see, the erosion does go down the hill. Next slide, please. This is a sunset photo I took on February 15th, 2024 at 5:27 p.m. This is facing west on Klaus Road. This is across from the mushroom farm where the proposed project would be built. Next slide. I've labeled this Snow Geese and Friends. This was taken on February 15th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. facing northwest on Sunday Road. Here you can see snow geese and other birds hanging out on the fields. Justin, is it possible to bring up the YouTube playlist? Can you play Snow Geese and Friends, Windsor Township, Part 1, please? Thank you, Justin.
Just one moment. For purposes of clarifying the record, a video was just played which showed birds flying and I guess squawking, and they were purported to be snow geese.
Snow geese and friends. There were snow geese and other birds I was not able to identify. I also wanted to point out there was a very nice sunset in the backdrop.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Next slide, Justin. All right, this is another one showing the snow geese and friends taken on February 15th at 5:31 p.m. This is slightly further down on Sunday Road. I just wanted to show the birds up close and personal. If you could go back to the videos, Justin, and play part 2. Which it looks like you have it up, you just have to rewind it a little bit.
So again, for the clarity of the record, a second video was played, again showing a more zoomed in visual of the birds in question.
Yep, next slide, please. All right, so this is a screenshot I took from the weather.
On relevance ground. Slide 12. It's kind of hard when she's testifying in the narrative, so.
So slide 12 is the Snow Geese and Friends. They're on
It's the Weather Channel.
the Weather Channel. Can you provide? I mean, it's kind of hard for me to rule on the objection until she testifies. So I'm going to allow you to proceed, understanding that if the objection is to be sustained, that it would be stricken from the record.
I understand. I just wanted to mention that the reason I provided the videos of the snow geese is to prove that the snow geese and other birds do migrate through Windsor Township. Previous testimony by others has proven that snow geese in the past have been around in the area, and I just wanted to show that they're still here in 2024.
Is it testimony or an argument? I object, and it's an improper lay opinion.
So I think that the nature of the objection really is, this is time for testimony. What you just indicated was really an argument that you can reserve for a later point in time. So at this point, the argument that you're raising will be stricken. It doesn't mean you can't raise that argument later when we get to the point where you can give a closing statement. If what would be helpful though is if you could, so there was a preliminary objection to slide 12, which is the slide from the Weather Channel showing 2.04 inches of rain has fallen in the last 7 days. Can you provide a proffer or an explanation as to what the relevance of this slide is to the testimony?
I'm going to be going into that the next few slides. It has to do with stormwater runoff.
Okay, so then the objection will be overruled based on that proffer, and we will proceed.
I wanted to comment on.
Well, I would object. I don't know where we're going with this, but she's not an expert in stormwater.
Right, but it will be given its proper, the board will give it its proper weight. It doesn't go to admissibility, that goes to the weight of the evidence.
May I comment on the previous objection on the birds?
I don't see what you, at this point, the objection was overruled, so I don't think there's any reason to continue to argue about it.
Okay, well, I just wanted to rephrase it and say I'm submitting these videos and photos as proof that there are birds that migrate through the area.
Okay, understood. If you want to proceed with your testimony.
Okay, so we're on slide 12 here. This shows that there's been 2.04 inches of rain that has fallen in the last 7 days, with the most recent heavy rains occurring on March 10th through the morning of March 11th. I can't read the date on the bottom of the slide, but the Weather Channel was taken on 3/13, so it was 7 days within that window. Next slide, please. All right, these are photos I've taken with my phone on March 12th around 6:21 p.m. facing northeast. There's a drainage pipe that runs under Klaus Road where water from the farm fields runs along the road and goes through this drainage pathway, which then flows through a horse farm. So on the left is like the most zoomed out. You can see the large rocks that come out of where the drainage area is, and it flows down. I'm not sure what you call that, a swale or something. And then on the right-hand photo, you can see that there is a pile of water that appears to be building up. Next slide, please. Here's a zoomed-in version of that photo, and it shows that the water is there piling up. It's hard to see from this photo, but it comes out on the other side, and then it runs through a horse farm, which then proceeds down to the Hilltop Road, Yeager Road intersection. Next slide, please. This photo was taken with my phone on March 11th at 6:57 p.m. facing north. This was after it rained from March 10th to the morning of March 11th. You can see underneath the fence there for the horse farm, there is water flowing down to the pipe, which if you look at the Yeager Road and Hilltop Road sign, there is a pipe sticking out there that has like a neon wrap around it. Next slide, please. Again, this is a slightly to the left version view of that previous photo here. The water is flowing through the horse farm. You can see the flow from the previous photo on the right-hand side of this photo. And on the left, if you look between the slats of the fence, you can also see that there's water sitting there. Justin, could you please go to the YouTube channel? And please scroll up to play video number 1, water flowing through horse farm.
Again, for clarity of the record, a video was just played 10 seconds in length in which there was images of what's been testified to be a horse farm and some water which has been flowing through it.
Next slide, please. This is applicant Exhibit 3, their revised plan. The stormwater management plan, if you look near what's labeled as DP002, there appears to be a water pond of some sort for the project. That pond is likely to drain along Klaus Road down to that pipe.
What's the objection?
Proper lay opinion, speculation.
Do you have a response?
I'm affected by this stormwater discharge that comes from Klaus Road. It flows down to that valley that I mentioned previously.
Ms. Fowler, that all may very well and be true. What I need a response to is Mr. Gallagher has raised an objection as to that you don't have the ability to render the opinion that you're rendering, number one, and number two, that your testimony is speculative in that it's not been determined that that's where that. I guess what you're arguing is that where that pond is not where it is on your exhibit. Is that what's speculative, or what is speculative?
She doesn't know what she's testifying to. She just admitted it. She's not sure. She's rendering an opinion on a matter that is the subject of expert testimony.
Use the microphone. Are you basing your opinion on your evaluation of the exhibit, the applicant exhibit number 3 document that's on the screen?
Yes.
The objection is overruled. You may proceed.
All right. As I was saying, the pond appears that it's going to be draining, and likely it's going to be running along Klaus Road to that pipe, which would flow down where I showed previously. Next slide, please. I did want to mention with the water runoff that that water flows through what we call Jaeger Creek, and that I have to cross that creek to get to my home. All right, so
How do you cross that creek? Is there a bridge?
we have a small bridge. Yeah.
Is there a concern that if the water rises higher, that the bridge would no longer hold? Is that your concern?
I'm concerned that it could erode the bridge, yes. And right now, the water that flows through there during the storms we've had, it's been fairly clear. I'm concerned about the runoff with this project, that the water could become cloudy.
How large is the bridge?
I don't know the exact measurements. You could park a normal car on it.
So is it a bridge that you drive over, or is it a bridge that you walk over?
You drive over.
Okay,
Yeah, I believe it's concrete or stone.
thank you.
Yeah. I did want to make a correction on the record. The original slides I sent out had a typo. This slide should have said, the board may not know. Your copy says the board does not know. That was a typo on my mistake. Right, so going on, what type of solar panels will be used for this project? So far, we don't know. I feel like this could impact the emergency response and the health of residents if there's an emergency such as a brush fire. How many solar panels are needed to build the 64 megawatt project? We know that 50 megawatts is to connect to the grid. This could affect the decommissioning bond. Without knowing the solar panel type or quantity, I don't know how you can figure out glare. The applicant hasn't shown how they've built their other projects, which could prove or disprove if they can be good stewards of the land. The board should know what the applicant's best practices look like, hence why I did this analysis. I'm going to be going over the applicant's best practices so that the board can make a more informed decision on the project. I'm presenting evidence that I obtained from Leeward Renewable Energy's best practices, their websites, their videos, and their engineering, procurement, construction contractors. My main concerns are stormwater runoff, erosion, sedimentation, glare, emergency response, especially the fire risk, the loss of open space, scenic views, the loss of productive agriculture land, the migratory
Objection on
boards.
Speculative concerns. This is speculation.
I'm testifying on my concerns about the project.
I don't know that it's speculation. She's laying a foundation for her testimony to come after, where she will, I presume, provide more concrete support for her position. So at this point, I'm going to overrule the objection, subject to further testimony.
All the above could impact Windsor Township residents and the broader community that travels through Windsor Township. Next slide, please. The applicant's interpretation of 615.9 appears in applicant exhibit 37, their glare analysis. The applicant interpreted Windsor's glare ordinance as, it, quote, it requires the avoidance of direct and concentrated glare onto adjacent properties or roads. The applicant admits in their exhibit that there will be glare, green and yellow glare on some of the roads abutting the project area.
Just object again. She's testifying to a field of which she has no expert knowledge.
She's citing your exhibit.
And, well, it's not, you have to appreciate that this isn't a narrative form and it's not question answer, so all I can do is look at the exhibit.
I understand, and I have the same limitation, but you're objecting to her. Your objection is to her essentially testifying as to what your exhibit provides. If I were to sustain this objection, should I not strike the exhibit that she's testifying from?
I would strike this whole exhibit, yes, but that's me.
I'm not referring to this exhibit. I'm referring to the exhibit that you've submitted with the Clinton glare analysis. So I don't think you can have it both ways. So if you believe that the Clinton glare analysis should be part of the record, then I believe that this witness's interpretation of that exhibit is also relevant.
Well, the interpretation would be relevant if she had the expert credentials to critique it.
So again, she can render an opinion that will be given its due weight by the board. Her testimony is admissible, whether it's given as high a weight as expert testimony is for the board to determine in their due discretion. So the objection is overruled.
All right. I'm going to just repeat what I was saying. It says the applicant says the avoidance of directing concentrated glare onto adjacent properties or roads. Windsor Township's ordinance section 615N states solar energy systems shall be located on a building, lot, or parcel in a manner that avoids directing concentrated solar radiation or glare onto any adjacent property or public way. Next slide, please. When you ask most people to look up something, they typically say, I Google it. So I decided to test this out. So I decided to type out concentrated solar, tried to spell out the word radiation to see how far I'd have to type it out to see what Google would recommend. So as you can see on the screen here, I wrote concentrated solar, and then I typed the letter R, and the first recommendation was concentrated solar radiation. Next slide, please. The next slide says concentrated glare on the screen. The original copies I handed out to you had a typo and said concentrated solar glare. It should have said concentrated glare. So I repeated the experiment with concentrated glare to see what Google would suggest to me. So I wrote out the word concentrated, and then I wrote G-L-A-R, and this is what it gave as a response. Concentrated glargine, concentrated insulin glargine, I'm not sure how to pronounce the next word, for diabetes. Concentrated insulin glargine. What does it mean when a product is concentrated? What is concentrated or? What is full spectrum concentrate? What is spadenium concentrate? It did not recommend concentrated glare. Next slide, please. Moving on to my analysis of Leeward Renewable Energies projects, engineering, procurement, and construction companies, they typically build the projects for the developer. Using Leeward Renewable Energies projects, Big Plain Solar used an EPC
Objection,
known
lack of
as...
personal knowledge. This is lack of foundation.
Where did you locate this information?
I located it on Leeward Renewable Energies websites, their YouTube videos, and their engineering, procurement, construction company websites that they use for their projects.
And when did you view these websites?
In March of 2024. I couldn't give you the exact dates off the top of my head. I have all the sources in my source document, and on the screenshots I do write which videos they came from.
The objection is overruled. Please proceed.
Thank you.
And I mean, I don't want to object every single time. I just would place a standing objection to this.
I can't rule on a standing objection because
We're understood, but this is the narrative form of testimony presents some obstacles.
did you review this slide deck prior to this evening?
Yes.
Do you want to place on the record objections you have to specific slides?
I would just rather go through slide by slide.
Okay. You may proceed.
Thank you. Leeward Renewable Energy solar projects that use first solars, thin film solar panels or modules, quantity indicated if known. The first project is Barilla Solar, 30 megawatts AC, 330,000 panels, cited on Leeward Renewable Energy's website. Big Plain Solar, about 200 megawatt project, over 800,000
Objection,
panels.
relevance.
You're objecting to relevance of what?
All these other citation to other projects.
Are these projects that Leeward Energy has been involved in?
I don't know.
Ms. Fowler, do you know?
Yes, they are all Leeward Renewable Energy projects that are listed on their website under their portfolio.
So then explain to me, Mr. Gallagher, how this is not relevant.
Well, I'm asking how it is relevant. This is a proposed project for this site.
Your objection is that the discussion of prior projects that the applicant has completed are not relevant to this application.
So the conditional use standards that we have to meet, they are not relevant. Each project stands on its own.
Each project stands on its own. So the track record of,
It's not a track record. We don't even know, there's been no foundation for what this is even being offered for.
yes, there has. If you go back to the slide that says the board may not know, in our packet it says the board does not know. She has referenced that she is intending to show these for best practices as implemented by Leeward Energy. So I believe that a foundation has been laid, and I am puzzled to see how prior projects by the applicant are not relevant to this application. Accordingly, the objection is overruled.
Thank you. As I was saying, Big Plains Solar is approximately 200 megawatts. They have over 800,000 panels cited on Leeward Renewable Energy's YouTube video. Rabbit Brush Solar project is approximately 100 megawatts, over 415,000 panels cited on the McCarthy Building Company Inc. website, which is one of the EPCs for Leeward Renewable Energy. Oak Trail Solar is approximately 100 megawatts AC, unknown quantity of panels, but they did cite that they were using First Solar panels in a First Solar document. Horizon Solar, approximately 200 megawatts, unknown quantity, cited on Leeward Renewable Energy's website. White Wing Ranch Solar, approximately 160 megawatts, unknown quantity of panels, cited in PV Magazine. Next slide, please. This slide represents the top solar EPCs in Q3 of 2023. Wiki Solar lists which ones rated in the top 10. I wanted to point out here that utility scale solar is considered 4 megawatts AC or greater, and the top ones in the top 4 were Solve Energy, McCarthy Building, and First Solar. Below, there is a screenshot from solveenergy.com. It talks about them being the #1 EPC contractor and the #3 solar contractor. Next slide, please. Leeward Renewable Energy has a supplier code of conduct. This is a screenshot from page 4 out of 8. And I wanted to point out here that Leeward Renewable Energy's expectations and guidelines with respect to responsible sourcing includes our commitments to human rights, the environment, health and safety, business ethics, and the development of a diverse and sustainable supply chain. Under Section 1.1 compliance, they state that suppliers are to abide by all applicable national, state, and local laws, regulations in the markets where they operate. However, where local laws or standards differ from the supplier code of conduct, we expect our suppliers to comply with the more stringent standards and principles. Next slide, please. This is a continuation of the Leeward Renewable Energy Supplier Code of Conduct, page 7. This is under environmental protection. By making long-term decisions, LRE seeks to reduce our environmental impact across our supply chain and to follow sustainable land use, construction, and operational production practices. We strive and encourage our suppliers to reduce our collective impact on the air, land, and water. Under the first bullet point, it says suppliers are encouraged to implement industry best practices for environmental protection and must comply with all applicable national, state, and local environmental laws, regulations, and applicable project permit conditions, including those related to pollution, spill prevention, waste disposal, hazardous waste, air emissions, wastewater, toxic substances, and protection of environmentally sensitive plants and animal species. Under bullet point number 2, it says suppliers are encouraged to adopt policies against deforestation and commitments to protecting high conservation value and high carbon stock land and water resources. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot from Leeward Renewable Energy's website of their Big Plains Solar project in Ohio. As you can see in the picture, it appears to be rather brown, bare ground. There's no vegetation, and it appears fairly flat. I know it's a little hard to read here on this screen, but it does say that the project will be using the thin film solar panels for First Solar. Next slide, please. This is again Leeward Renewable Energy, or LRE as I'll refer to it commonly, Big Plains Solar Project. They're using Solve Energy as their EPC. This is an announcement telling us that. And there's also a screenshot there on the bottom right from a Leeward Renewable Energy YouTube video showing that Big Plain Solar is the contractor. Next slide, please. Leeward Renewable Energy has a video on their YouTube channel called Big Plain Solar. This is where the screenshot has come from. This is screenshot 1. The land appears mostly flat and highly disturbed. There appears to be some water sitting on the upper left part of the image on the site. The solar panels here appear to be slightly reflective. There appears to be some vegetation to the outside of the project on the left. You'll see there's some trees. Next slide, please. This is LRE's Big Plain Solar screenshot number 2 from the same video. The project again appears mostly flat, heavily disturbed ground. Vegetation appears to be starting to grow back in some of the areas and also outside the project area. Here, some of the panels reflect light, and on the bottom left of the image, you can see that there are some piles there waiting for the racking equipment. Next slide, please. This is screenshot 3 from the same video. As you can see here, again, it's mostly flat. You can see on the right, some of the grass is starting to grow back in. And in the middle of the image, you can see there's a big trench that's dug. And on the left-hand side, there's water laying on the project towards the upper part of the photo. And on the left, you also see there's some piles. Next slide, please. This is screenshot number 4 of the Big Plain Solar project. This appears to be a substation with some kind of switching gear. Some parts of the substation appear to be very tall. If you look at the American flag, you can also see that there's lightning rods that are higher. I know it's kind of hard to see that because I don't have the mouse control, but on each of those posts, those 2 taller posts on each end, there's lightning rods on top of that. And I'm concerned about that because with our project, I suspect that there'll have to be some kind of lightning protection, and I'm worried that it could exceed the 20 feet, which according to the Windsor Township zoning ordinances, no part of this project may be above 20 feet. From the Windsor Township zoning ordinance, a commercial solar energy system is an area of land or other area for a solar collection system principally used to capture solar energy, convert it to electrical energy or thermal power, and supply electrical or thermal power primarily for off-site use. Commercial solar energy systems consist of one or more freestanding ground or roof-mounted solar collector devices, solar-related equipment, and other accessory structures and buildings, including light reflectors, concentrators, and heat exchangers, substations, electrical infrastructure, transmission lines, or other appurtenant structures. One of the things I wanted to point out with this project is there's going to be some kind of substation and switching gear, and I wanted to point out that the gear that's within the boundaries of the project is going to be considered owned by the developer and not the public utility. Next slide, please. This is LRE's Big Plain Solar screenshot number 5. There appears to be some kind of rut or trench underneath the several rows of panels. There appears to be snow lying in these ruts or trenches. Again, the site appears mostly bare and fairly flat. Next slide, please.
It's the same objection. I mean, even in her characterization on these panels, it's what appears. She lacks any actual personal knowledge. This is all speculation.
It's her description of the pictures, Mr. Gallagher. Again, the objection is overruled, but your point is noted, and the board will give this evidence its due weight, as what your objection goes to the weight of the evidence, not necessarily to its admissibility.
All right, this is Solve Energy screenshot 1, which is a Leeward Renewable Energy EPC. Some panels appear to be installed and some panels appear to be reflecting light on the left-hand side of the photo. It appears kind of like the reflection you would see off a pond or a lake. On the right-hand side of the photo, it appears that there's some piles and mounting gear that's been arranged to get ready to put some more solar panels up. The site appears mostly flat and bare. In the far upper left of the picture, you will see that there is some vegetation. This was taken from a Solve YouTube video. Next slide, please. I've labeled this slide as Solve Energy screenshots 2 and 3. Again, this is a Leeward Renewable Energy EPC. On the upper left, the first photo, the workers appear to be pile driving. I noticed that they're wearing hearing protection and face protection, and the ground appears mostly bare. The photo on the bottom, which I labeled as right, appears to be a group of workers that are taking a break from pile driving. There's a pile that's installed on the bottom left of the corner. Again, the workers appear to be wearing hearing protection and face protection, and the ground appears mostly bare. Next slide, please. McCarthy Building Companies, Inc. is known as McCarthy. It's also a Leeward Renewable Energy EPC, according to their website. Next slide, please. McCarthy Building Companies, Inc., this is screenshot 1, known as McCarthy. They mentioned that they use over 415,000 First Solar thin film photovoltaic modules for Rabbit Brush, which is a Leeward Renewable Energy project. Next slide, please. McCarthy Building Companies, Inc., screenshot number 2. This is the Rabbit Brush, a Leeward Renewable Energy project. This appears to be a site that's fairly flat. The ground is bare. There appears to be piles and boxes set out in an organized fashion like they're preparing to put them into the ground. Next slide, please. This is McCarthy Building Companies, Inc. Website picture. This again appears to be a project area that is fairly bare. There's some vegetation just starting to grow around the edges, and it has a little bit of slight slopes. Next slide, please. Blue Ridge Power, screenshot 1, also Leeward Renewable Energy EPC. This is a screenshot from their website talking about the Oak Trail Solar Project using First Solar's photovoltaic solar modules. Next slide, please. Blue Ridge Power, screenshot number 2. This is taken directly from their website. The ground appears to be disturbed. It's bare in some locations. Some panels appear to be reflecting light in the upper left-hand part of the picture. Kind of reminds me of a body of water, how it would reflect light. Next slide, please. Blue Ridge Power, screenshot number 3, again taken from their website. The ground appears to be bare, stripped of vegetation, and fairly flat. Next slide. This slide is a drone photo taken by my family's drone in Richmond Township at the Lions Solar Facility, which is the closest solar facility I know to Windsor Township. This was taken on May 14th, 2023 at 6:52 p.m. facing southeast. I know it's a little hard to see on the screen, but if you zoom in on your digital copies of this exhibit, you will see that there are what appears to be white piles in the ground. It kind of reminds you of like being at a cemetery. There's a lot of posts. And also the ground is fairly flat. It's disturbed. It's very bare compared to the farm fields on the right-hand side of this photo. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about noise from pile driving. Justin, if you could please go back to YouTube and play Solar Farms. It's that first one that's 40 seconds.
For clarity of the record, a 40-second video was just played, and there were construction images, and of note, there was construction audio that was played, purportedly of pile driving.
Thank you. So that video was showing, in my opinion, pile driving into the ground that was fairly flat. It appeared that the pile driving machine was ripping up the ground pretty good. Justin, if you could please go to the YouTube show and play the solar pile driver one that's on the screen that's 14 seconds. You have it up already, Justin.
So again,
This
for
is a great
clarity of the record, a second 14-second video is shown, again with similar depictions of construction and audio of construction.
Thank you. So these two videos were ones that demonstrate pile driving. I wanted to show the board what pile driving looks like and sounds like. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it has to do with the decommissioning report that was submitted. Applicant exhibit number 11 claims that there will be 13,500 piles used for a 50 megawatt AC project. This means that there will be 13,500 piles that will be driven into uneven hilly terrain. The number of piles plus the number of panels and panel composition has to be considered when determining amount for the decommissioning bond, which is discussed in Windsor Township Ordinance Section 615O. Next slide, please. Going back to the Richmond Township Lions Solar Facility, this is drone photo number 2. This was taken on July 30th, 2023 at 5:24 p.m. facing southwest. This was 77 days after the first drone photo. You'll notice in the upper left-hand side, the panels appear to be reflecting the clouds. In the front, you'll notice that the ground appears fairly bare despite being 77 days after the last image. It's hard to see on this image, but there's some what appears to be erosion, runoff issues off the panels.
Objection.
What's the basis of the objection?
Speculation.
Can you read back the testimony, please?
Going back to the Windsor Township Lions Solar Facility, this is drone photo number 2. This was taken on July 30th, 2023 at 5:24 p.m. facing southwest. This was 77 days after the first drone photo. You'll notice again on the left-hand side, the panels appear to be reflecting the clouds. In the front, you'll notice that the ground appears fairly bare despite being 77 days after the last image. It's hard to see on this image, but there's some what appears to be erosion, runoff issues off the panels.
Which portion of that do you believe is speculation?
The erosion, what appears to be erosion caused by the solar panels.
For that limited purpose, I will sustain that objection. But you may proceed with your testimony.
Okay, next slide, please. This is Richmond Township, the Lion Solar Facility. This is the drone photo 2, except it's zoomed in, so you can see the panels closer. Again, the ground appears mostly bare and flat. There's not much grass coming back yet. It appears to be some evidence of water running off the panels. The panel that's in the middle of the screen that's going from the bottom left to the upper right, there appears to be a trench of some kind that appears to be running from water. Next slide, please. Again, this is drone photo 2, except it's zoomed in slightly to the right of the previous photo. Again, the ground appears mostly bare and flat. I see evidence of concentrated stormwater runoff from the edge of the panel and solar arrays, and it appears to flow under one row to the next.
It's the same objection, just stated.
You can see it on the screen.
I think that the difference here, Mr. Gallagher, is that she's describing what she's seeing in the photograph. So the objection is going to be overruled.
Next slide, please. Calculating possible runoff for this proposed project. According to the applicant Exhibit 3 revised plans, which are marked up in red on the left-hand side of this slide, there's going to be a total of 75 acres of impervious area. So here you'll see I wrote out 1 acre, how many square feet that equals, 1 inch of rain, figured out the volume of rain, the number of gallons per cubic feet. It turns out that there'll be 2 million gallons of water that'll hit the solar panels and other impervious surfaces for every inch of rainfall. I checked the weather this afternoon for Lenhartsville, Pennsylvania. This Saturday, the 23rd, they're expecting rain, potential for heavy rainfall. 1 to 2 inches of rain is expected. Next slide, please. This is applicant exhibit number 39, Tommy Cleveland's health and safety report. You'll see here under solar panels, he mentions that they'll use either crystalline silicon or cadmium telluride for solar. Next slide, please. Leeward Renewable Energy's Horizon Solar Project. This photo of their project appears to be mostly bare around the solar panels. There appears to be some vegetation in the distance outside the project area. Next slide, please. Leeward Renewable Energy is using First Solar modules for the Horizon Solar project. You can see that here in their screenshot on their website. Next slide, please. Leeward Renewable Barilla Solar in Texas is using First Solar's thin film modules. The screenshot was taken from their website. They say it's comprised of 330,000 First Solar Inc. photovoltaic modules and interconnects to the AEP Texas. Next project. Next slide, please. LRA partnership with First Solar for thin film photovoltaic solar modules. This was written on April 27th, 2023. It says today they announced an agreement to supply 2 gigawatts of advanced responsibly produced thin film photovoltaic solar modules to Leeward Renewable Energy. The deal is expected to see First Solar deliver the modules in 2026 and 2027. Next slide, please. First Solar's thin film modules. On the left, in the upper left, you'll see Leeward Renewable Energy's Horizon Solar and White Wing Ranch will utilize First Solar modules. It's a screenshot from the website of pvmagazine-usa.com. On the bottom left, you'll see Leeward Renewable Energy's Rabbit Bush Solar project, approximately 100 megawatts. They'll use over 415,000 First Solar thin film photovoltaic modules. On the upper right, you'll see a screenshot from First Solar's website on their technology, which is cadmium telluride, also known as CadTel for short. On the bottom right, it states from First Solar that they use the cadmium technology as it has a lower cost compared to the crystalline silicon technology. Next slide, please. First Solar is working in collaboration with the National Renewable Energy Lab, also known as NREL. Here it talks about how in late 2020, First Solar's thin film CadTel PV technology reached a milestone after 25 years of continuously monitored performance testing, becoming the longest running research project at NREL's outdoor testing facility. NREL also does decommissioning for solar systems, and they have a technical report labeled NREL's best practices at the end of the photovoltaic system performance period. I'd recommend the board to look into that, since Leeward Renewable Energy appears to be using First Solar's technology, and First Solar appears to have a relationship with NREL. Next slide, please. National Renewable Energy Laboratories, NREL's best practices at the end of the photovoltaic system performance period. Section 6.1 says avoid hazardous materials. Paragraph 2. Hazardous materials can be in wafer cells, thin film cells, solder, cover glass, and back sheets. A PV module might contain approximately 10 grams of lead per module, mostly in the solder, but also in the cell metallization layer. Thin film cells made of cadmium telluride contain toxic metals and are stable when bound together as a compound and encapsulated. However, when exposed to the acidic environment of a landfill or in fire, these toxic compounds can be liberated. Ramos, Ruse et al., 2017. If cadmium telluride panels catch on fire, toxic compounds could be released, which could impact the health and safety of...
Objection. This is a lay opinion. She's testifying to expert, I guess testifying to expert matters that are only within the knowledge of an expert.
What's the basis for your testimony?
I'm showing that there's a relationship between Leeward Renewable Energy and First Solar, and First Solar uses the technology of cadmium telluride, which has a safety risk if it were to catch on fire.
Where are you getting the information on the safety risk that you're testifying to?
From the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that First Solar has an active relationship with.
So is this in this report that you're referencing?
Correct.
So it's not an analysis that you've done yourself?
No, this is in the official technical report.
Okay, can you point to the page where that is in the report?
May I have the exhibit to reference?
Which exhibit are you looking at?
This is labeled Fowler 6. This is the one I mentioned. I wasn't going to print out individual copies for everybody since I submitted it in advance, but I did make one for the official record.
Okay.
I'm sorry, where is this report? She handed it out.
She provided it in advance, so there's not a physical copy of it.
Would you like me to bring it forward?
Yes, please. So what you've brought forward is page 17. Can you read the section that you're referencing?
I'm referencing section 6.1, avoid hazardous materials, paragraph 2. It says hazardous materials can be in wafer cells, thin film cells, solder, cover glass, and back sheets. A PV module might contain approximately 10 grams of lead per module, mostly in the solder, but also in the cell metallization layer. Thin film cells made of cadmium telluride contain both toxic metals and are stable when bound together as a compound and encapsulated. However, when exposed to the acidic environment of a landfill or in fire, these toxic compounds can be liberated. And it's citing Ramos Rose et al. 2017.
Thank you. The objection is overruled.
And then, well, I guess and this is almost every single slide, I mean, there's commentary at the bottom of page 55, which, again, I'm just restating for the record, this is improper lay testimony. She's making an expert opinion, and it's speculative. So
I think it appears to me that she's reading and providing evidence from a report that's been proffered as an exhibit. As you know, the rules of evidence are not strictly applied in this context. So the objection is overruled but noted for the record.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to mention that on the front cover of this Fowler exhibit, it says NREL is a national laboratory of the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, operated by the Alliance for Sustainable Energy, LLC. If cadmium telluride panels catch on fire, toxic compounds could be released. This may impact the health and safety of Windsor Township residents and possibly nearby Greenwich Township residents due to the large-scale nature of this project. When measured using the Berks County parcel search ruler, I measured from the longest corner to the longest corner of the project, 1.72 miles. This is not a small project. Next slide, please. Again, this is from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's best practices at the end of the photovoltaic system performance period. This is section 6.5. It says planted contingency if the responsible party is unable to perform decommissioning. It says, quote, the decommissioning clause should also address the possibility that the developer might fail to deliver the decommissioning plan. At least one case has occurred where the contracting partner declared bankruptcy and was unable to perform the work of removing the system and restoring the site ground cover. Most jurisdictions would consider an inoperable PV system abandoned and might have the authority to remove the system and place a lien on the value of the property. Further down in the second paragraph, it says changes in the cost of decommissioning, for example, if landfill tipping fees increased, might require revisions to the bond amount. Next slide, please. Decommissioning applicant exhibit number 11. They say the project life is expected to be between 40 to 50 years. They also say they're restoring the premises to its original condition or mutually agreed upon state. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about Windsor Township zoning ordinance about intensive agriculture, 201.8, paragraph 2. It talks about how a greenhouse with greater than 50,000 square feet of growing area is considered intensive agriculture. So 1 acre equals 43,560 square feet. If you multiply that by 10 acres, you get 435,600 square feet. 100 acres would be 4,356,000 square feet. The proposed project by Leeward Renewable Energy's Mountain Trail Solar is over 400 acres in Windsor Township, and it's listed to be in the A Agriculture Zoning District. If we apply the intensive agriculture definition to this project, it appears that this project would be considered intensive agriculture, which would not be a permissible use under the zoning ordinances. The board should consider the best practices of Leeward Renewable Energy and whether or not this project fits into the township's definition for an agricultural district. The panels are to be considered impervious for stormwater calculations. The Lions solar facility that I showed photos showed that there's water runoff issues that can occur. The Windsor Township terrain is much more sloped compared to the Lions project. In some places, there are steep slopes, which can make water management difficult but important. The board should consider the number of panels, the panel type, material composition, the piles, and the substation, and the proposed bioretention facility for the project's substation, as that can contain possible contaminants and other materials needed for this large-scale project when they determine a decommissioning bond. Next slide, please. I wanted to bring up, how can the board trust the applicant to pay a large decommissioning bond, which could be millions of dollars up front, if they haven't demonstrated that they've paid their conditional use application fee with their January 4th, 2023 application? This is applicant exhibit number 1. It says they've submitted a check, but they have not provided an image that they have actually submitted the check. Next slide, please. Applicant exhibit number 41 was a December 5th, 2023 letter delivered by applicant's attorney, Mr. Gallagher. He states that zoning boards have the power to permit the amendment of an application. I wanted to point out that the Township Board of Supervisors are different than a zoning hearing board. We're currently in conditional use hearings. The Dale case cited by the applicant says, quote, a zoning hearing board is to apprise potential Protestants of general nature of the application. I did have a typo here on the original handouts. I wrote barred and not board, so my apologies on that, but it's fixed on the digital copy. The application being reviewed is in conditional use phase, where the supervisors act like judges. In the Arnold case cited, it states the developer orally amended their application to remove a building to comply with the zoning ordinances. This is very different than adding a second applicant to an application already being reviewed in conditional use hearings. Next slide, please. Again, this is applicant exhibit 41. It says assignment and assumption of contracts. I want to note that the application was submitted on January 4th, 2023. The first conditional use hearing was on October 18th, 2023. The assignment and assumption of contracts was dated as November 30th, 2023. Next slide, please. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see Leeward Renewable Energy Development, LLC, filled out the affidavit and got it notarized and regarding the option of contracts. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that Mountain Trail Solar started to fill out the agreement, but they didn't finish it and they didn't notarize it. A written agreement that's only signed and notarized by only one party may not be a legal document. Next slide, please. Expert reports submitted to the board were from the following entities: Mountain Trail Solar, Leeward Renewable Energy, and Leeward Renewable Energy, LLC. Who is Leeward Renewable Energy Development, LLC? When you reviewed the applicant's assignment of contracts, they had the name Leeward Renewable Energy Development, LLC. Next slide, please. What do I think of when I hear the word agriculture? I think of rolling farm fields, farmers out plowing the fields, harvesting corn, harvesting soybeans. I don't think of a solar farm covering hundreds of acres with solar panels and retention ponds. I want to reference Windsor Township zoning ordinance section 403.A-agriculture, talking about the specific intent. It is the purpose of this district to foster the continued existence of resources, watersheds, woodlands, historic resources, agriculture, and protect critical natural areas such as steep slopes, watercourses, water supplies, and ecosystems. Only limited, very low density, single family development is permitted. The following are specific purposes for this district: 403.1A, conserve open land, including those areas containing unique and sensitive natural features such as woodlands, steep slopes, streams, floodplains, and wetlands by setting them aside from development. 403.1.C, to reduce erosion and sedimentation by the retention of existing vegetation and the minimization of development of steep slopes. 403.1G, to protect the areas of the municipality with productive agricultural soils for continued or future agricultural use by conserving blocks of land large enough to allow for efficient farm operations. 403.1H, to create neighborhoods with direct visual access to open land with amenities in the form of neighborhood open space and with a strong neighborhood identity. 403.1.I, to provide for the conservation and maintenance of open land within a municipality to achieve the above-mentioned goals and for active or passive recreational use by residents. 403.1.J, to provide multiple options for landowners in order to minimize impacts on environmental resources, sensitive lands such as wetlands, floodplains, steep slopes, and disturbance of natural or cultural features such as mature woodlands, hedgerows, tree lines, critical wildlife habitats, historic buildings, and fieldstone walls. 403.1.L, to conserve scenic views and elements of the municipality's rural character and to minimize perceived density by minimizing views of new development from existing roads. I wanted to wrap up by reading some quotes from the Richmond Township Board of Supervisors. This is where the Lions Solar Project is. This is from the October 9th, 2023 meeting. With regards to Floyd Kurtz's well water issue,
What's the can you provide to me what you're reading from?
I'm reading the Richmond Township Board of Supervisors minutes from their meetings.
I think if you want that to be before the board, you need to mark that as an exhibit.
Okay.
Yeah, relevance.
Do you want all the minutes marked together as one, or do you want the individual dates?
You can do it as one exhibit, and then we'll address your relevance objection, but I want to have it marked first. May I please have the exhibit? Yeah. No, you're fine. I just want to.
It's just the parts that are highlighted.
If any of the parties or council want to review these, they may come forward.
It almost doesn't matter what it says.
Well, it's an official record, though.
Still relevant. Objection to the objection.
Okay. Mr. Gallagher has reviewed the what's been proffered as Exhibit Fowler 7. Mr. Gallagher, state the basis for your objection.
It's irrelevant to this
Could you
proceeding.
please use the microphone?
But why is it irrelevant?
A project that happened in another township has no bearing on a project proposed in this township.
Could you use the microphone, please?
Ms. Fowler, what is your response?
My response is this is the closest solar project that I'm aware of that's near this community that the Windsor Township Board of Supervisors could visit and learn from to look at this application in regards to stormwater runoff. That project is fairly flat. Our project is on proposed hilly terrain. And if they had water issues where it's flat, we're going to have water issues on the hills, which I'm going to be directly affected by.
Go ahead.
The objection is overruled. However, as I've stated before, I believe that there is some limited relevance to this. The board will review this and assign it its appropriate weight in making their final determination.
I understand.
And just to be clear, this is not a Leeward or Mountain Trail solar project.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it is stipulated that this is not a Leeward or Mountain Trail solar project.
Correct. May I read a few excerpts from Exhibit 7?
Is there an objection to that?
No, I mean, that's fine.
Okay. There's no objection. And
I mean, it's the same objection to the,
so your objection is on relevance grounds?
yes. And you,
Okay. So can you identify where you've obtained this?
I obtained this from the Richmond Township website.
Okay. So this is the official record of their meetings?
Correct. It's public record.
It's public record? Okay.
Yes.
You may, if you feel necessary, read a couple of excerpts.
Yes. The reason I wanted to read the excerpts is I've been laying the foundation showing how Leeward renewable energy projects are mostly flat, and our project here in Windsor Township is going to be on hillier terrain. So the closest project that the supervisors could look at would be the Lion Solar project. It's also fairly flat. So I'm just trying to show the best practices for a project that's fairly flat, what that looks like, and then they can interpret how it would affect a hilly project. All right, so from the minutes on October 9th, 2023 for the Richmond Township Board of Supervisors, quote, with regards to Floyd Kurtz's well water issue, the letter that was sent to DEP, Scott mentioned that he had heard from a representative at South Central Regional Safe Drinking Water. Next quote says, since the new well has been dug, Floyd has had some clear water, but not all the time, end quote. It appears to me that this gentleman, Mr. Kurtz, is still having issues with his well water.
I'm object on the hearsay. It's an official record, but to the extent that it's being offered for the truth of the matter asserted is a different objection.
Who said what you just quoted?
This is under the engineer's report, Scott Anderson for the township, Richmond Township.
So to the extent that the exhibit has
Any relevance? Sorry.
your objection has been ruled on, Mr. Gallagher. To the extent that the exhibit is stating things that were said that a third party has said, those are not permissible because of the hearsay rule. So that objection would be sustained. The exhibit itself is an official record of the proceedings, and the board can take the equivalent version of judicial notice of those records. And so I don't believe that you reading those into the record is going to be necessary. However, the exhibit is a part of the record.
May I read so that the residents of Windsor Township knows what was said in these minutes, since they don't have a copy in front of them?
I can't have you read into the record things that are hearsay, but those will be made the exhibit will be made available to the public.
It's an official engineer's report, though.
I understand, but the engineer's not here to testify as to what was said.
Okay. So in Fowler Exhibit 7, which will be made available to the parties via the online Dropbox, you'll be able to read the minutes from Richmond Township's Board of Supervisors from October 9th, December 11th of 2023, and also from January 8th, 2024, I recommend people check that out because it talks about stormwater issues.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Okay. Do any members of the board have questions? Okay. Mr. Cluck, cross-examination. No question. Thank you. Mrs. Palinuk? No? Did I get it right? Mr. Hartman? No questions. Mr. Hoffner, I don't believe you're here this evening. Mrs. Stabile? No questions. Mr. and Mrs. Yob? No questions. Mr. Osenbach? Not here. Mr. Balthaser?
No questions.
Thank you.
No questions here.
No questions from Mrs. Balthaser. Mr.
No.
Mr. Fowler? No questions. Mr. Gallagher, cross-examination.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Ms. Fowler.
Hi, could you please use the microphone so the audience can hear you?
Yes. So can you just, what do you do for a living?
I am currently battling medical conditions, so I don't have a job at the moment, but one of my good days, I'm an investigative journalist.
Okay, so did you go to college to become an investigative journalist?
No, I had medical condition that prevented me from going to college.
Okay, so what is you've graduated from high school when?
2011.
Okay, and do you have any education after that? Or training or certification in any industry other than investigative journalism?
I've taken a few online classes, but no certifications.
Okay. Your online classes, are they for investigative journalism?
No, they were in other topics.
Okay, and have you been employed by anyone as an investigative journalist?
No.
You have no engineering, well, I assume you have no engineering background.
No engineering background.
Not a geologist.
No.
Okay. Just to be clear, you have no experience in the solar industry.
No experience other than just the solar farms on our farm.
Okay.
Under the panels, sorry.
And exhibit, well, your exhibit, I guess it's G, how is this marked, GF2 or?
Fowler 2 for the slides.
Yeah,
Gwyneth Fowler, too.
okay.
Oh, it's a Fowler 2, I think, on the
Is it
sticker.
Fowler, too? It's Fowler, too.
So there were a number of photos and I think like pages 26 through 51 of other solar sites that you provided testimony to.
Is that a question?
Yes.
What? Could you please
so-
rephrase it?
There are a number of different sites that, or solar facilities that you have provided pictures for in slides 26 through 52. There are a number of other solar projects that you've provided testimony to other than this one.
Correct. They were Leeward Renewable Energy projects, with the exception of the one in Richmond Township, which was the Lions Solar Project.
Okay, and with respect to the Leeward ones, you've never visited any of these sites?
No, I haven't.
Okay. And you're not familiar with at what stage of development those sites were at during these pictures?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, and you did not speak to anybody who prepared any of the materials that you cited to or put in your presentation?
No, I didn't speak to anybody from Leeward Renewable Energy. I took all of this from Leeward Renewable Energy's websites, their YouTube videos, and the engineering procurement construction contractor websites, which had their own photos and documentation of the projects.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you. So this would now be an opportunity where I would ask you if you have any redirect, which would be whether or not you wanted to clarify anything that was brought up on cross-examination. So do you have anything that was brought, that, and it's limited to what was brought up on cross-examination. Is there anything that you wish to add to your testimony?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up that the projects that I showed from Leeward Renewable Energy was to show a foundation of what they've done in the past to try to get a scale of what they might do in the future for this proposed project to give the board a better idea.
Okay. Any members of the board have questions based on that additional testimony?
No questions, but I just comment. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Polinak. Mr. Hartman, no questions. And there were no questions from Mrs. Polinak either. Mrs. Stabile, no questions. Mr. and Mrs. Yob. Excuse me? No questions. Okay. Mr. Balthaser.
No questions.
Mrs. Balthaser.
No questions.
Mr. Fowler. Mr. Cluck, I missed you. Any follow-up questions? Mr. Gallagher.
No.
Okay. Thank you. You may step down at this point. We are going to take a 10-minute recess.
Before we do that, how do I enter my exhibits into the record?
Before we do that, I will take your question as a motion to admit Fowler 2 through, what's the last exhibit number?
7.
2 through 7 into the record. Are there any objections?
Can we also admit Fowler 1 in case my party status gets brought up on appeal, that the brief that I wrote is in the record as well?
I believe that it is, but for clarity's sake, we'll do Fowler 1 through 7 inclusive. Is there any objection to any of those exhibits? Mrs. Polinak. I blew it, Mrs. Polinak. No, I take that as no objection. Mr. Hartman. Mrs. Stabile. No. Mr. Balthaser.
No questions.
No objection to the exhibits either.
No objections.
Mrs. Balthaser.
No objections.
Mr. Fowler. Mr. Cluck. I'm going to take, that's a no.
Before you finish that, I forgot to mention there is a USB drive.
Yep. Mr. Gallagher.
No objections to 1 through, or the only objection would be to 2 to the extent there's hearsay in it. But the admission.
The exhibits are admitted. The board will review, and to the extent that there is inadmissible hearsay, the board will give it its due and appropriate weight.
Thank you.
All right, we will now be in recess for 10 minutes. Okay, we're going to go back on the record. Okay, so our next presentation is by Scott Fowler. If we can have the witness sworn.
Yes.
Okay, you may proceed, Mr. Fowler.
All right. Thank you. I think I want to do things a little bit differently given the hour right now. I have an expert testimony that I'd like to present. I was going to do some kind of a introduction to all that, but I think I'm going to flip this around. If we have time, I'll do my part at the end so that our expert testimony can be heard next. So what I would like to do is call Jarrod Emes to testify on at the hearing. I have...
Just wait 1 second, Mr. Fowler.
Okay.
Please state your name for the record.
Jarrod K. Emes.
Okay. Mr. Fowler, you may proceed.
Okay, I'd like to present his CV to the board. It's already been marked.
Been provided what's been marked as Exhibit S. Fowler 1.
Okay. Mr. Emes, thanks for being here tonight. We just have a few questions to go through this qualification process for testimony. What is your current occupation?
I am self-employed. I am a private detective, licensed and bonded by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as well as employed as a municipal emergency management coordinator and also the volunteer fire chief of the local jurisdiction here.
Thank you. Your CV is rather extensive. Could you give us a kind of a summary of your educational background?
Yes, it's 24 plus years in emergency services. I graduated from Alvernia College with a bachelor's in criminal justice with a minor in sociology and social work, as well as National Pro Board certified as a Fire Instructor 1, Firefighter 2 Pro Board, as well as officer development courses provided in a 20-year service to the Commonwealth, as well as also certified professional series by the Pennsylvania Emergency Management for the local level emergency manager.
How long have you been involved in emergency management?
Well over 10 years.
What positions do you hold in the emergency management field?
So I worked for 9 months as a county emergency manager before leaving to enter the private sector. Since then, I have been employed as a local emergency management coordinator for the Township of Windsor, the Borough of Shoemakersville, Perry Township, Center Township, and Tilden Township in our immediate area.
I think you may have already answered this, but just for clarification, are you the fire chief at Union Fire Company number 1 at Hamburg, Pennsylvania?
Yes, I've been the fire chief for the last 3 years. Been a member of the department for well over 22.
Did you say over 20?
22 years.
22 years. Is that how long you have been a volunteer then at the fire company, 22?
Correct.
Given that your CV shows a lot of training and certifications, I don't think we would need to go through it. Is there anything that you might want to highlight?
Through the course, we've been, I'm pro board certified as a hazardous materials operations level, as well as taken a 40-hour technician level course that's been certified. So we do have a general understanding in emergency services and how to respond to hazardous material incidences, as well as smaller solar farm projects within the scope that we currently are operating in the township.
Do you have any professional affiliations?
Just membership with the NFPA and some local level career-oriented affiliates.
Does your CV accurately outline your education, training, and experience in emergency management?
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to admit Mr. Emes as an expert in emergency management.
Okay. Before we do that, I will give the other parties an opportunity to question Mr. Emes if they so wish. Mr. Cluck, do you have any questions?
I want to clarify. You said local emergency planning commission?
No, I'm local emergency management coordinator. It's on the local level.
What is the LEMC?
The
Local emergency management?
Yes, it's each municipality is responsible for appointing a emergency management coordinator that's there to assist with the emergency management rules as defined by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I've met the requirements as well as a training background as far as emergency management planning, consulting, and various other needs as defined by the Act.
Is an emergency services coordinator the same or different?
Different, but it's how you view the occupational needs on whether it's emergency services specified to fire, police, EMS, or emergency management.
Do you have any good roles in Windsor Township?
Yes. The emergency management coordinator and also the fire chief and deputy fire marshal.
Is there an emergency services coordinator?
There is one on the county level, there's one on a county level. Let me correct that. State, county, local municipality. So you have 3 levels of it.
Is there one for the township?
Yes.
I have no objection to this qualification.
Thank you. Mrs. Palanik. Mrs. Palanik. No? I had it before. Palanik. Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Hartman, any questions? No questions. Mrs. Stabile. Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Yob. No questions. Mr. Balthaser.
No questions.
Mrs. Balthaser.
No questions, no objections.
Thank you. Ms. Fowler. No questions. Okay. Mr. Gallagher.
No questions.
Okay. Any members of the board have any questions? Okay. And can you state again what you're seeking to have him admitted for as an
expert in emergency management.
Okay. And Mr. Emes will be so admitted and recognized as an expert in the area of emergency management. You may proceed.
Are you familiar with the proposed solar project?
Yes.
Have you received any documents related to this project?
Yes.
What fire companies serve the proposed project area?
The primary agency would be the Union Fire Company number 1 in Hamburg.
And as we discussed a few minutes ago, you are the fire chief of that company, that fire company.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about Union Fire Company number 1. Where is it located?
We're located in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, which is the closest municipal boundary adjoining to Windsor Township. We've served the residents since 1832, providing primary fire rescue and protection services to the citizens in the community.
Are there any full-time or part-time paid staff at Union Fire Company number 1?
No, we're a 100% volunteer department.
How many volunteers are involved?
About 25.
Do you have enough volunteers?
No.
How many more volunteers would you need to reach adequate staffing, in your opinion?
It would have to reflect off the current NFPA standards that are out there, and it would be a significant number.
Significant number?
Yes, to increase it for the staffing levels for apparatus responses.
How many vehicles does the fire company maintain?
We're in a evaluation process. Right now they're running 2 engines, 2 Class A engines, a 100-foot ladder truck, a heavy-duty rescue truck, 1 4x4 brush truck, and a dedicated brush truck.
What is the newest vehicle that you own? How old is that?
It is a utility truck, and it is going on, I believe, 6 years. I apologize. I don't have these.
Is that an SUV type of truck?
Yeah, it's a 4x4 utility truck.
What about the larger, what you would call the apparatus equipment?
So the 4x4 Class A engine that would be used for this, the response area, would be a 1992 4x4 engine. That would be the primary brush and apparatus used for the response area outside of structure fires or accidents with entrapment.
In terms of the rest of your fleet, what is the newest apparatus that you have?
It would be the that utility truck.
Okay. Do you have any experience or training regarding fires involving solar panels?
So we have received over the years for the State Fire Academy training on how to handle solar panel fires on residential buildings. We have not received anything, or there hasn't been guidance yet on larger solar farm projects of the nature of this project.
Do you think DC arc faults or other electrical faults or wildfires on the lands of the solar project are credible fire risks?
I do believe in the research that I've conducted that it would be an elevated risk that would attribute to fires.
Are you familiar with the land proposed for use by the proposed project?
Yes.
Approximately how far by roadways is the solar project from Union Fire Company number 1?
It's approximately about 4 to 5 miles, depending on roadways and travel locations.
If there was a fire in the proposed solar project area and you needed water to fight that fire, where would you get it?
We have a large pond that's located about 1.5 miles to 2 miles adjacent to Old 22. That would be our primary suppression source for water, as well as depending on tankers for mutual aid departments.
Would special chemicals be needed to put out a large-scale electrical fire? And
yes.
It's okay. You said yes?
Yes, there's several different applications. We would obviously coach with the energy company just on what their recommendation suppression efforts would be. However, we would follow the guidelines as we're taught in the instruction, as what's published.
If you needed to use special chemicals for fighting the fires, would you need special personal protective equipment to use with these chemicals?
Yes.
Do these chemicals typically require special storage or disposal protocols?
Yes.
Could these chemicals contaminate surface or groundwater if used on the land?
Yes.
Would firefighters using these chemicals need to follow a special decontamination protocol?
Yes.
I believe you briefly described a truck that you might be using to fight a fire on the solar project area. You described it was at the brush truck?
Yes, due to the terrain, it would have to be a 4x4 brush truck, or, and I apologize for omitting this, we do have a one UTV four-wheel drive apparatus that we would be using for deployment that we had just purchased within the last several years due to the terrain around this. So that would also be a suppression piece that we would have to look at due to the hills and the access points, as well as the volume of the project space.
With respect to a brush fire, does the fencing, gated access, gravel roads, and rows of solar panels make such fires more difficult to handle compared to brush fires on open farmland?
Correct.
DC voltages within the solar project area may be up to 1,000 volts. Does this pose an additional or unique risk of electrocution to firefighters?
It does. It's going to present tactic issues that we're going to have to identify based on the involvement of how many panels could be involved, wind direction, time of year, as well as the suppression needed to suppress that fire.
If there would be an electrical fire on the solar field caused by a DC arc fault, it is reasonable to say that that would occur during daytime hours. When is your volunteer staffing at its lowest level?
Primarily from the hours of 5 a.m. till about 3 p.m. in the day, Monday to Friday.
How many firefighters are needed to run a typical apparatus or fire truck?
The NFPA standard should be 4 for every time it leaves the door.
Understanding that the specifics can vary, what is your estimate of the minimum number of people that you would want to dispatch to the solar facility if you received a report about a fire?
It's going to be based off the call type of a fire. It's probably going to be at least a first alarm assignment consisting of 2 ladder trucks, 3 engines, 4 tankers approximately. Based on a run card development, which once we have the overlay, we will develop that run card response with mutual aid companies that are closest to supporting our efforts.
Do you have enough firefighters available during the day to respond to such a fire?
The general national statistics are that the volunteer fire service is dwindling. We have half of what we did a number of years ago. We struggle with staffing levels during the day due to a lot of our regular members that they are working first shift jobs at other locations outside of the area. So it does dwindle our manpower.
Are you aware of any other fire companies that service the project area in Windsor Township?
There's a secondary fire company, which would be Virginville, which would be the next closest, followed by Shoemakersville, and then Kempton as mutual aid departments. The 2 primary in the township, though, would be Hamburg and Virginville.
Have you or any of the people you supervise responded to any solar panel fires?
Not to my knowledge.
The applicant may be using solar panels that contain cadmium telluride. I intend to present some testimony to show that there will be about 6 tons of cadmium telluride deployed across this 400-plus acre project. Cadmium telluride has a melting point of 1,041 degrees Celsius and a boiling point of 1,050 degrees Celsius. If cadmium telluride is present in the solar panels, would this affect how the fire company responds to a fire within the solar facility?
Yes, it's going to affect how our suppression efforts are going to take place based on the volume of fire load that will be present and the materials used for suppression.
Is there anything else that you think should be presenting at this point?
Our biggest concern is just that we have the life safety that if the project would take place, that the necessary equipment is provided by the owner to provide fire protection services to the community.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler. So, Mr. Emes, when you say that the owner would provide other equipment, what are you referring to?
Just that they're able to provide the most current apparatus or equipment needed for those suppression efforts due to the impact issues of the project affecting the community.
Can you identify this specific apparatus?
It would be the 4x4 engine that would be utilized, which we have spoken to some of the safety planners about already, about replacing it with a current one with appropriate chemicals that are outfitted as well as ATV units.
Okay. When you say you've already spoken to the safety planners, can you explain who you've spoken to?
It was one of the directors had contacted me about 6 months ago as they began the process of looking to identify what would the impact equipment be for a project if it was to take place. I don't have his name with me right now.
And was this a safety coordinator affiliated with the applicant?
Yes.
Affiliated with Mountain Trail Solar or Leeward Energy?
It was Mountain Trail and Leeward. I was approached on a conference call with them about it.
Okay. And what was discussed on that conference call?
Just that due to the size of the project, that we were going to need additional resources, that if emergencies would take place, that we could provide adequate protection. So we identified them with spec models of apparatus, costs, and equipment ratios, as well as addressing issues with the flooding in the area if it would present with water management just the need for additional pump supplies and things like that for any type of support for that type of flooding.
Okay. And who initiated that conversation?
They had contacted me, and then we opened it up as an open discussion.
Okay. Were there any conclusions reached about equipment that will be provided?
No, not yet.
Any members of the board have questions?
So I would like to present the witness with a map of the project that's out of,
So that's part of Board Exhibit 1, I believe. That just for reference. What page is that on? I may not have a page number. It's a fold out.
so what I gave you, Mr. Ames, is a copy of the applicant proposal in the application there. And my question is, are you familiar with the layout where the roads are at?
Yes.
Okay. So if there were a fire and on a hot August day where the grass is dry, how are you going to get that truck that they offered to give you into that site?
So we would have to review, according to the code standards, the applicable access points that would be established for the fence lines that are coming in. They're going to be pre-staged locations. Just give me a second here. We did address offset issues between the fence line to the gate panels, that they do need to follow local code with installing that and ensure that all apparatus access points permit emergency vehicle access for suppression efforts. So that would be done with local code.
So my question is, when you look at that drawing there, it doesn't show really access roads. It looks pretty concentrated. And if you can't get the truck to it, how long are your hoses and what can you accomplish before it gets out of control?
Correct. I do believe with the current layout that would be a very big concern. I do know, looking at a past map that I was presented with, they did have one access gate to come in and out for access control. We did address the sizing of that. However, I do believe that their perimeter for access needs to be expanded for suppression efforts. And then obviously equipment needed, that if we had to run extra hose for suppression, that we have adequate equipment for that.
Okay, and they said they'll provide that equipment?
It was discussed, yeah.
Okay.
They have not confirmed on what they will commit to yet at this point.
Okay. That's the summer situation with the dry grass on fire.
Correct.
What about the winter situation if there's snow?
So we're going to have those 4x4 units for access control. Due to the terrain, it is going to be imperative that we have a mid-sized 4x4 unit, as well as 4x4 command apparatus and the ATV units for access areas, due to how this is set up and the way the complex is split up on the property. It's not what I would constitute is one solid project line. It's broken up into 3 section parts, so just that we have those, the ability to navigate the terrain that is around the project.
So in your past experience with, you were trained on solar fires on roofs of such like that. Do they burn fast? Do they spread fast? Or is that not a concern? Or what's your concern with the homes being
So our
close to the
concern
property?
is going to be the burn off. There may be a brief point that we will have a free burn point until we're able to navigate to isolate that electric to render it safe before we can either decide, is the correct application going to be a foam-based product, water-based, or a powder-based application, depending on what is implemented. Due to the location, we would recommend a shelter in place and follow all guidelines as published through the hazmat protocols that we would establish. So that free burn would be a concern, but that would also be the recommendation would be the shelter in place for no direct exposure.
So the free burn is when can you explain that a little more?
So
burn?
the free burn will take place from the time the ignition source takes off until we're able to isolate that power to stop that through a suppression effort.
So have you been trained on the inhalation hazard? Is that, I mean, is
Yes.
that, is that like a full suit, gas mask type
Yeah,
situation?
our suppression effort will be the firefighters will be in their PPE that is NFPA compliant with breathing apparatus, and they will be under breathing self-contained
tanks.
oxygen. Yeah.
So the
for
residents, what do they do?
They should shelter in place, and I will have to address that as we go moving forward because of the volume. I don't have that present information right now just because of the volume and still learning on the safety issues that would present if, we're talking about multiple field sections of being, under fire load.
Okay. So my last question is, I don't know, so educate me and the board and anybody else in the room, but the foam that would be used that you propose, what's the safety hazards with the foam? Is that a hazard or is it like water?
Yep, so it's about volume. It is a suffocant. It could be considered if it enters water source with some things. So we will have to conduct under the hazmat technician program, damming, diking, and diversion issues, that if we do have to apply that foam application where it's being contained to try to keep it out of stream beds, local level areas with livestock and things like that.
So it's harmful to aquatic and mammals?
It could be based off of volume of the application. It is diluted, but it is about the concentrate and the volume of the application that could be, concerning to wildlife. What does dissipate it is large volumes of water. I'm talking about thousands and thousands of gallons to dilute it. In our world, they always use the phrase dilution is the solution. You have to have large quantities of water to do this.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
Mrs. Palinuk.
Yes, I do have some questions.
My question is, did I get your name right this time?
You did.
Wonderful.
All right, so you talked about ladder trucks. What role would they play in this type of an application?
So in this type of application, it would be an elevated master stream, which is the deployment of water. We at the Union Fire have a 100-foot ladder truck where we would position it for elevated master stream application for deluge operations of large volume water. We can also use that for a little bit of vapor and cloud dispersion, but it's going to be depending on the factors that are present, the environment, the day, how much involvement of smoke there could be, and things like that.
Okay. How many staff for just one ladder truck?
In the area, we have a 100-foot ladder truck. Virginville has a 75-foot quint. The next due would be coming in, which would be Schuylkill Haven as a platform ladder. And then I believe on that run card section would be Windsor Township coming with another 75-foot ladder truck for mutually.
How many people per truck would it take to run on a volunteer basis?
I don't have that because it's based off of who's available at the time of the alarm. So we have no guarantee in staffing during these timeframes.
Can you send out a truck if it is not fully staffed?
We can, however, we're going against the NFPA standard that's established for critical staffing.
So what is your estimated time for getting staff to the house to get on the truck to go?
So the Berks County Communications Center has it that the first dispatch is initiated with about a 3-minute second dispatch mark. After that 3-minute mark, it's another 2.5 minutes approximately until they then start covering the failed companies or apparatus, depending on how the run card's established. And then it's auto covered based off of the run cards that I'm responsible to develop, which there's categories the county mandates. So we have to have so many ladder trucks I believe it's and this is just off of memory, 10 ladder trucks, 25 engines, 25 tankers. I think it's 10 or 15 brush trucks. There's a criteria that the county mandates that we have to establish, and we do that off of time distance studies.
So to one of these particular sites, what would be your estimated time of response from the call-in to getting staff there to start the process of putting out?
Anywhere between, I would say, 3 to 8 minutes, depending on time of day and a few other factors. What I can testify is I live at 301 Chris Drive, which is just in the subdevelopment, just right down from it. So my response time, as long as I'm home and available to respond, will be within a matter of minutes. So at least we can get a first responder and a command officer on site to try to dictate what our guidelines are going to be for operational needs.
So going back around to the chemicals, who provides those? Who pays for those?
It can either be at the cost of we would have to take on that expense, or the project coordinator could help with providing that to us as a resource need.
Who would pay for the cleanup involved with all the thousands of gallons of water needed to dilute?
That would be the responsible party, so it would be Renew Energy.
It would be them and not the actual landowners? It wouldn't?
It's the way that it's worded with the law, it's the responsible party is responsible for remediation and removal.
Okay. So basically they would be responsible for the whole process?
Correct, yes. Anything that we put down as far as suppression material, once it's dispersed for suppression, it then becomes their responsibility for mitigation efforts afterwards.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman, no questions. Mrs. Stabile.
Just one. Is there a process where, how do you know if they clean it up?
I don't. That is when the referral for DEP will come into play, where the state has notifications that once we're there, we'll notify the comm center that we had an active fire, and they'll do their notifications to the state agencies that are responsible, whether it's DEP. Just trying to think.
Mr. Emes, can you make sure you use the mic? The court recorder might be having a challenge to.
Yeah, it would be the state agencies that would receive the referral. So like I'll use DEP as an example. The comm center should be making those notifications for a DEP notification, and then it's up to the state to send. Once we leave and render it safe, it's their responsibility to ensure that that side of it's conducted.
And they do well water and everything.
I know they offer different services. I don't have the specifics on what the state actually offers. Once we render the scene safe, they take over, and it's kind of it's out of my experience on some of those things that they do.
So how, if we have a problem with well, we're contacting the state?
They'll have necessary resources. We'll also take note of it, and we'll interact with the county EMA if needed with needs as they're coordinated.
Okay.
I would also recommend that you reach out to your insurance companies for any supplemental needs that could be made through your property and life insurance or property insurance.
Well, everybody in Lyndhurst fills on a well.
Yep,
so,
correct. Yep.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Yob.
Before her event, like she said, most of us are all on wells.
Mhm.
So you're saying that whatever, depending on what you have to use to suppress a fire, it's going to contaminate, and you're going to need to dilute. Where are you going to get the water from? And who's going to be? Now you're saying we're going to have to do a addendum to our insurance, so now it's going to cost us money on top of this to get some kind of protection on our insurance.
I don't. I'm just making the recommendation that you look into those remediation needs that are out there. I don't know what each individual property owner is going to suggest. My suggestion would be to establish that currently you have safe reading levels in your wells, and I would have a test completed just to verify that if anything would ever happen, there's your control point.
So we're going to be, so
I don't have that information. That's beyond my scope.
Okay, then I'm asking you, who's going to be responsible for this, whatever's happening?
I'm going to give you the same answer, unfortunately, but I think your point is well noted for the record.
But you still didn't answer where you're going to get all this water to.
So, like I said, we're going to be utilizing the pond off of Old 22. If it goes beyond that, we'll identify secondary water support sources throughout the township by either large volume. We do have the Maiden Creek that's just east of us down in Lenhartsville with a tanker shuttle, where if we do need to deploy a tanker task force for water evolutions, we do have that resource available in our run cards.
And what happens if it goes beyond to the houses?
As far as where?
Where's the responsibility? Who are you going to say? The house or the water?
So it's always life safety and property preservation. So if there's a safety aspect involved where we're not able to suppress what is causing it, that's going to get folks injured or hurt, we're then going to roll down and go to the next available option for property preservation. Yep.
Mr. Balthaser.
Yes, I have some questions. It's firefighting foam and other firefighting chemicals that you mentioned would be needed in the event of a fire. You also mentioned that in order to get rid of those chemicals, that you need large quantities of water to dilute those chemicals. And is it possible, or how possible is it that water, that excess water, would end up in the groundwater in the area? I mean, where else would that water go?
Yeah, I believe it's going to be conditional on the type of the season that we're in, whether it's a very wet or dry season with the ground absorption. I don't have that stats. I am not. I don't have the ability to testify on ground saturation and the volume that it'll take, but I know it's going to be a concern as we go through with our suppression efforts.
Right, but it's highly probable that it's going to go in the ground somewhere.
Correct.
And the groundwater. Where else is it going to go? I mean, otherwise it runs off into the river and contaminates other groundwater or surface water somewhere.
Yeah, we do have some damming and diking techniques that we've been trained on. It's all going to be dealing with the amount of runoff water, though. The large volume is going to make it harder than if it's a smaller volume and quantity to control.
Right. But if it does get into the groundwater, say it shows up in my well's now permanently contaminated. Is that a true statement?
I don't know that. I'm not able to provide that.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mrs. Balthaser.
Yeah, just a question about sheltering in place if there were a fire, especially if the wind is blowing towards the houses. Even if we're sheltered in place, do you think that we would not have any ill effects from that toxic smoke? I mean, I'm thinking that some of it is going to get into our houses and into our lungs. And do you think that's plausible? You said you were familiar with the landscape there.
Yes, I'm an emergency medical technician. I do believe that if there's any type of inhalation of any toxic substance that could cause concern. Our initial training aspect is always isolate and shelter in place. If anything is needed beyond that, where we do need to do a joint evacuation, we will establish that as needed. By that point, we'll also be utilizing resources through the local and the county level for those efforts if need be, and the department members that are responding there to provide the response.
And is there ever a time where somebody is in a potentially toxic situation, like such as this, that then the, people that live nearby are giving some kind of, emergency equipment should a fire break out and should you have to shelter in place? Have you ever heard of anything like that?
We're going to go back to just using universal precautions that are out there as far as masks and various other outlets that have been published through the CDC and such for any type of inhalation concern that's out there, whether it's masks or if it needs to be beyond that, then we'll be making the evacuation routes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Fowler.
My first question is, if cadmium telluride panels are used and there were to be a brush fire that eventually caught the solar panels on fire, would you consider that a concern for the community if cadmium telluride were to get basically on fire?
Yes.
My second question was, you mentioned that your volunteers are low during the day due to many of your volunteers working first shift jobs. Let's say hypothetically there was a fire around noon. How many people do you think could respond to a fire call, and how long would it take from them to get from their job to the firehouse before they can go out in the trucks?
I don't have that info. Years ago, a lot of our residents that ran with us in the communities, and this is across the county, they lived and they worked where they live. Unfortunately, a lot of folks are working at larger manufacturing facilities or for various other employers throughout the county, and they're not in a position that once they're at work to leave, or a duty and obligation to leave and respond. So I don't have those numbers. It's harder to do that than what it was years ago. I'm fortunate where I am able to leave work, but I am also self-employed. So my time away is at my own expense. You know, and as well as my family and my family of everybody that's going to be on the still alarms as they are dispatched. So I don't have the exact number because it really is dependent on time, day, you know, and different things.
Okay, and then my final question is, if there was a brush fire on the solar farm property, how many trucks would you send out, and how many people per truck would you like in an ideal world?
In an ideal world, while I know that we're governed by the NFPA standard, I would like to encourage that we try to stick to the manpower as close to that as possible. The apparatus that will be coming out is we will have 3 brush trucks, at least 2 tankers and an engine, and then it's elevated based on the alarm structures that we have set up. What I do have proposed that when or if the project was to come to light, we will be creating a separate run card response, which will have elevated resource needs to handle various emergencies that are going to be on site. So it'll be a increased staffing and apparatus. Apparatus plan versus staffing, because I can't guarantee staffing.
Okay, so correct me if I'm mistaken, you said 5 or 6 vehicles total, apparatuses that you would need?
Approximately.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cluck.
This is the applicant, board exhibit 1 or applicant exhibit 1?
Board.
Just for the record, the site plan you're looking at on the lower right-hand corner is the C-100, and that is from Board Exhibit Number 1. This is the application initially submitted in January of 2023. Did the applicant provide a copy of the project summary and site plan to you?
Yes.
When was that?
Within the last year. I have it on my office desk. I just don't recall the date.
On your direct examination, did you identify what documents you reviewed to prepare your testimony?
I don't have that at this point.
Okay, but
the exact document, but I did. It was issued documentation on the project.
Okay. Is there an emergency response plan for this project?
I don't have one yet. I would encourage that we will be doing one, and it will be a requirement for the project.
Did you request one?
I can't 100% state if I have or haven't. I have asked for a supporting document. I would just have to review what I have on file.
I'm sorry. Say that
I would have to review what's on file and what's been submitted, and I don't recall if I have officially asked for that operations plan or not yet.
Are you asking for one now?
If you could please provide one, I will gladly take it.
What are the elements of a community environment, what are the elements of a community emergency response plan?
It'll be establishing response guidelines and parameters to mitigate hazards that are present on an emergency.
Would it include a training program?
Yes.
If there was a arc fault or lightning strike and a fire erupts from a solar panel, how do you fight a solar panel fire?
So that is one of the requirements that we're going to mandate in that training, that we're educated on how to do so. I am not an electrical engineer, so I can't testify on the arcing and some of those other things until we receive the training and the orientation that's directed to mitigate it.
I would assume you would use foam.
I don't know. It's going to be off of what the manufacturer's recommendations is on the panels.
Okay.
So I don't have that yet to provide that.
Do you presently have an inventory of foam to fight electrical fires?
We have a very minor supply.
Okay. Does it contain PFAS, PFAS?
I would have to double check what our inventory is and what's labeled.
Okay.
But I don't believe so. It's regular AFFF foam is what we have now.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
Good evening, Mr. Emes. How are you?
Good.
Good. I'm counsel for Leeward,
Yep.
the applicant. So you had referenced you had discussions with Leeward early on about the project, and they shared the plans with you, correct?
Correct, yes.
And you've given comment on those plans?
Yes.
And you've had a number, it hasn't been one conversation, it's been an ongoing conversation.
Yes. Yep, several phone conversations, phone calls, and emails.
Okay. And you mentioned emergency response plan, and that was discussed with Leeward with
Yes.
you, that they would provide training and whatever.
I had requested it. I have not received confirmation of what they're going to offer back yet.
Okay. And as you said, if this goes on and forward with respect to land development, that there would need to be the development of emergency response.
Correct, yes.
And Leeward said that they were agreeable to that. They didn't object to.
No, there's been no objection in any requests that I've had so far.
And with respect to access to the site, was that ever discussed?
Yes, we have discussed it. I know that the plan has changed a few times. We have not finalized those access based on the code needs.
And you would have access at any time, 24/7?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And how would that be?
We would either have that, and I don't know what their plans are as far as staffing at 24/7. If it is not staffed 24/7, we will mandate that it'll have fire department access via a Knox box system.
Okay. With respect to the panels itself, you would agree that they're not highly flammable in of themselves?
I still need to do some more research to define that yet.
Okay. But you're agreeable. Did you, have you watched all of the hearings on this?
No.
Okay. There was a testimony by Tommy Cleveland. This is, I think, in October, and there was a report and extensive testimony about the flammability of panels. Did you review any of that information?
No, I did not.
Okay. And Leeward has been agreeable to providing support to the fire department.
They have acknowledged our request. They have not committed to anything at this point.
Okay.
We've expressed where our concerns are. We've expressed what our resource needs are and the cost implementation that's affected with it.
And you're agreeable to working with Leeward to come to a plan, an emergency response
For the protection of our citizens, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Did you have any redirect?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Emes.
Thank you.
Do you have anything further, Mr. Fowler?
Yes, I do. I would like to present a series of slides, photographs. I have handouts, and I have one for official entering into the record.
Okay, please, we'll go off the record for the purpose of marking that as an exhibit.
Justin, will you be able to do the same thing that you did for Gwen?
My understanding is it's kind of left column first, top to bottom, right side, top to bottom.
Yeah, that goes by columns.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And there's 2 videos then that'll be on.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, great. All right, super.
Okay. You may proceed, Mr. Fowler.
All right, thank you.
I just, before we begin, and, I don't want to continually object as we did with Ms. Fowler, but we've been handed what I believe is going to be a PowerPoint presentation which is on the board, and this appears to be the subject of expert testimony, and I'm asking for qualifications if it is going to be expert testimony.
And I think that's appropriate, Mr. Gallagher. Can you testify as to what your educational background is?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering from Lehigh University, and I practiced chemical engineering for 7 years. Then I changed fields into an electrical engineering field. I've been in the radio broadcast industry since 1989, working with the engineering side of broadcasting, which involves working with audio circuitry and radio transmitter circuitry, both what I consider low and medium power AM and FM broadcasting, dealing with circuitry that is high voltage in some cases, vacuum tube type amplification versus modern solid state electronic circuitry involving lower voltages and higher currents.
Okay. Mr. Gallagher, do you have questions?
Yes. So, can you go through your employment history for me, please?
I worked for Roman Haas Chemical Company back when I got out of college back in 1981. I worked there for about.
I'm sorry. What is
Roman Haas, R-O-H-M, and Haas, H-A-A-S. They were a Philadelphia-based company. I think they've been bought out years ago at this point. I worked as a research process engineer.
What did Rohan Haas do?
They're a chemical company. They manufactured various types of chemicals, agricultural chemicals, monomers for, say, oil additives and so forth. It was a variety of specialty chemicals.
Okay.
All right. After I left Roman Haas, I decided to change careers. I became a radio broadcast engineer. I worked for University of Pennsylvania for approximately 7 years as their technical director at their radio station in Philadelphia. And after that, I became self-employed, and I have worked for a number of different radio stations over the years. A few different clients that I've worked for. Again, doing the same type of work. It's either audio and it's radio broadcasting, so it's dealing with transmitting equipment and all the related technology for broadcasting a radio signal, plus studio work as well, maintaining infrastructure, electrical infrastructure within the studio environment.
So from 1987 to present, you've been in the radio industry?
1989, I believe, more accurately. Yes.
Okay. And do you have any practical experience in the solar industry?
I've never worked in the solar industry.
Okay.
Mr. Cluck, do you have any questions on this witness's qualifications?
Have you taken courses in organic chemistry?
Yes, I have. At Lehigh University, way back when.
What was your degree in?
Chemical engineering. We had to take a year's worth of organic chemistry.
That's the only questions I have.
Thank you. Organic chemistry? Mr. Davis believes that is an easy course. Do you agree with that representation?
It wasn't one of my favorite courses, especially second semester.
I'm going to get it. Mrs. Palanuk. No. Mrs. Palanuk. There we go. I keep saying silent H, silent H. Mr. Hardman. No questions. Mrs. Stabile. No questions. Mr. and Mrs. Yob. Mr. Balthaser.
No questions.
Mrs. Balthaser.
No questions.
Ms. Fowler? Thank you. Okay. So I believe that there's a preliminary objection as to the qualifications of this witness.
Yeah, if you just want to go through slide by slide, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to overrule the objection at this point. Preliminarily, if you have an objection, of course you may raise it. So please proceed, Mr. Fowler.
Okay, thank you. All right, the first slide here is, the question I raise here is how much cadmium may be present in this project. I thought it was a worthwhile calculation. We've been talking about cadmium a little bit with regards to safety, health, environmental concerns. So essentially, the process is fairly straightforward. If we know how much cadmium there is in one solar panel and we know how many solar panels are deployed on the solar field, we should be able to calculate the total cadmium that's going to be used. Next slide. All right, now the amount of cadmium telluride, which is the compound that's actually used for the solar, what they call the absorber material in a solar panel, is actually a published value. It's 0.012%. This is in First Solar's Series 6 modules. And this is an excerpt from that document that is, it's cited there at the bottom, the source, the web source for this document. It's part of a specification sheet for the First Solar Series 6 module. This is under the mechanical properties. Next slide. Coming from the First Solar data sheet, we can actually see how much one of these panels will weigh. And in the number there is just down a few lines on the chart, module weight, 34.5 kilograms. Next slide, which will be at the top right of that page. All right, so we already know how we can calculate how much cadmium telluride there is in the panel, but we're really focusing in on how much cadmium is present. Cadmium telluride is a compound consisting of two elements, cadmium and tellurium. Atomic number of cadmium is 48, tellurium is 52, and their molecular weights are there. Cadmium is 112.411, and tellurium is 127.6. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, so we calculate the amount of cadmium by dividing the weight of cadmium by the weight of the sum of cadmium and tellurium. A fairly straightforward calculation. We see the number, the fractional result is 0.4684. So slightly less than half of cadmium telluride is composed of cadmium. Next slide. All right, so now we can calculate the actual amount of cadmium in one panel. At the bottom is the math for that. We take the weight of the one panel from the previous documentation, 34.5 kilograms, and we multiply by the amount of cadmium telluride in one panel by weight ratio, 0.0012. That represents that small percentage that was in the chart a couple slides back. And then we multiply by the fraction of cadmium that's in cadmium telluride, and we get the result that there is 0.01939 kilograms of cadmium in one solar panel. Next slide. Now, the other part of that first equation of how many solar panels are there is something we have to calculate as well. The applicant hasn't disclosed or has not yet determined how many panels will be used, but we can come up with a reasonable estimate. Since we had the weight percentage of a First Solar Series 6 panel available to us, we used the data sheet for that First Solar Series 6 panel to come up with a number. At the very top, the top line there, nominal power, is telling us how much power one panel can produce. We're going to use the number at the very far right, the 460 watts per panel. That's the most generous number, and I say it that way because it's going to give us the smallest amount of cadmium in the calculation. Next slide. All right, so the question is, how many solar panels? Well, we first start with how big is this facility? The applicant has disclosed that it's a 64 megawatt facility. That's built on the ground DC, not the grid tie connection of 50, but it's actually 64. So that's the number that we need to use to calculate the number of panels. So we take the 64 megawatts, which is 64 million watts, divided by 460 watts per panel. And we get the result there of 139,130 panels. Next slide. So now we have everything that we need to know. We have the number of panels and the amount of cadmium per panel, and we multiply those two numbers together to get the number 2698 kilograms of cadmium. So the result of this calculation is that approximately 3 tons of cadmium will be deployed. I apologize, I misspoke earlier in my questioning of Mr. Emes about it. I mentioned 6 tons. I was in error on that. It was 6,000 pounds I was thinking. It's 3 tons when you convert the kilogram weight to pounds and then convert to tons. Next slide. When you do a calculation like this, it's always a good idea to try to do it more than one different way, and if it's possible to do the calculation an independent second way, it gives you a little bit of confidence as to whether or not you've done it right. I'm not going to go through all the slide-by-slide stuff here. I've kind of condensed it since I did this for the first one. It's pretty much the same methodology. But here we're going to approach it from a slightly different perspective. Cadmium telluride is part of what they call the thin film technology. It's the absorber material that's used. The published values out there for this is a 3-micron layer, so it's very thin. 3 microns is 3 millionths of 1 meter. Now, to calculate how much cadmium telluride there is by weight it's kind of the similar process that if you had a very thin sheet of plywood, the dimensions, the length and the width are fairly big, but the thickness is small. But it's the same principle. We can calculate what the volume is, and if we know what the density of the material is, we can calculate its weight. So that's what we're doing here. The density of cadmium telluride is 5,850 kilograms per cubic meter. Now the surface area of the first solar panel, which is analogous to the 4x8 dimension of a sheet of plywood, can be looked up as well. Here we're going to pull the data from a different data sheet. This is the first solar series panel data, 2.47. I don't have the slide here showing that data sheet, but that's where that number came from. And the reason I chose a series 7 is because it's the newer panel. The data I had with the other method was for a series 6 panel, so I wanted to use the most current data. Solar panels get more efficient, less material is needed. I didn't want to skew it by using the same thing. I thought, why not change that too? It gives us a little bit more confidence that we might be coming up with a reasonable number. Now, those Series 7 panels are a bit bigger. They're probably a bit more efficient. 540 watts is the number that I got for the output per panel. So we can go through the same calculations we did before. The number of panels, we take 64 million and we divide that by 540. We get 118,519 panels, a bit lower number as we would expect because the panels are bigger and perhaps more efficient. The amount of cadmium telluride in one panel is also easily calculated by the same method that we used before. Here we're going to do it like it's a sheet of plywood, the dimensional 2.47, which is the square footage of the panel times its thickness, which is 3 millionths of a meter, times its density, is going to give us the weight of cadmium telluride in one panel. And then the next step is to derive the amount of cadmium from the cadmium telluride from our previous work, that fraction of 0.4684 representing the fraction of cadmium and cadmium telluride. So we get a number that is 0.0203 kilograms of cadmium per panel. We multiply that by the number of panels, and we get the answer 2,406 kilograms. The result is substantially in agreement with the other method. It's slightly lower. It's about 10% lower than 3 tons. And the reasons for that is that we're comparing different panels. The efficiency might be better, so you need less material. And the thickness of cadmium telluride is published at 3 microns, but there could be some plus or minus to that. Maybe that number is rounded. But effectively, in my opinion, the results are the same. Next slide. I want to move on now to the subject of DC arc faults. Now, direct current itself is current that flows in only one direction, as opposed to alternating current that flows in a reciprocating direction. DC current is what you get out of a battery, and it's also what you get out of a solar panel. Now, arc faults, DC arc faults can start to occur when your voltages go up to about 70 volts or higher. And the higher the voltage, the higher the risk. And it's really the physics that's used for arc welding. It's the same idea there, is you have a voltage across a gap. In this case, a DC arc fault can be caused when you have a connection that deteriorates. I have a video here I'd like to play. This first one from AC Solar Warehouse. It demonstrates what an arc fault looks like. It's 52 seconds long.
Objection. Lack of foundation. He's not an expert in the solar industry. He has no personal knowledge of how this fire actually started.
Is the video showing a fire starting, or is it?
It's demonstrating what a DC arc fault looks like and how it can be created.
And you have expertise as an electrical engineer?
As an engineer, yes, I'm aware of, you can have arc faults that can cause arcing, and this is going to demonstrate how one would be sustained this is under controlled conditions. It's not an example out in the field, but it's an example that it is possible to create a DC arc fault with solar panels. And this can be a cause of fires in the solar field, which I'm going to demonstrate that they do catch fire.
Okay. The objection is overruled. You may proceed.
Go ahead.
Demonstration showing the intensity of arc faults on DC solar systems. Here we have 4 solar panels connected
Pause the
together
video.
in series.
Can you identify who's speaking on this video?
No.
If we play the video without the audio, would it demonstrate what you're seeking to demonstrate?
Yes, you could do that.
Okay. Mr. Schell, is it possible to mute the audio? All right. Please proceed. Okay. For the clarity of the record, number one, if it wasn't clear, we did sustain Mr. Gallagher's objection as to hearsay, and the video was played without audio. The video was about 52 seconds long, and it depicted a solar array, and then it did depict a male individual holding, I don't know what they're called, but two items where he was able to conduct and show, and there was some fire that did exist between those two conductors when they were touching. Mr. Fowler, is there anything you want to add as to the video?
No, we can continue.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about DC arc faults in the context of solar facilities.
Again, I'm a Jack. This is a lay opinion. He has no expertise in this area.
Can you please explain again what you have expertise in electrical engineering and in chemical engineering? Are the principles that you're going to discuss specific to the solar application?
No, the principles would apply to any situation where you have high voltage, especially DC voltages. These arc faults are an inherent physical nature of electricity. When you have a gap and you have a high voltage across the gap, you can create an arc.
Okay, please proceed. The objection is overruled.
So groups of solar panels in a utility-scale solar electric facility are connected in series to increase voltage, well above the threshold for creating the risk of a DC arc fault and any connection point in their circuits. There may be approximately 120,000 solar panels on the field. Now, each one of those panels has two connections, a positive and a negative, but most of them are connected to each other. So in the aggregate, there's still a little bit more, but there's still at least 120,000 connections that are on the field. Now, when you have a DC arc fault, there's a lot of energy that's released. You saw the video showing what one looks like. If there's combustible materials near the fault, it can cause a fire. Now, the one issue with the solar farm is that if there is a fire like that, if there is a DC arc, there's no way to turn the power off to the solar panels that are exposed to the sunlight. The solar panels will continue to generate electricity until they are actually disconnected from the system. The electricity provides the energy that may sustain the arc fault and support a fire. I have another short video I'd like to show.
Is there audio on this video?
I honestly don't know, but it can be muted.
Okay. For the clarity of the record, a video was just shown. I don't have the exact length of it, but it was probably around 30 seconds, and it did depict what appeared to be fire adjacent to what appeared to be a solar array. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Fowler?
No, that pretty much speaks for itself, I think. Okay, so solar panel fires do occur. Now, this depends on the integrity of the connections. These occur because connections go bad. Either they're faulty or they deteriorate over time.
Speculation, this is improper lay opinion.
Overruled.
The causes of these connections deteriorating can be thermal, expansion and contraction because of temperature change can cause connections to deteriorate. You've got connections outside, so there's always that risk of you're going to get moisture in there, which is going to accelerate the rate of corrosion of the metals. Now, if you do have a fire and you have people nearby, there is a safety and health concern there that people could be exposed to toxic materials in the smoke. I'm going to show some examples of solar fires to demonstrate that when they do burn, it doesn't look very good in terms of what's being emitted. You'll see some pictures, and it will look like it's a dirty, what I call a dirty fire, kind of reminiscent. If you have a tire fire, that's kind of the classic dirty fire. So that it'll remind you of that. So we can go ahead and show the next slide. So this is an Amazon rooftop solar fire.
I'm going to object. Many objections. One is relevance. Two is lack of foundation or personal knowledge.
We'll start with the lack of foundation. How do you know about this fire?
It's published. I submit it at the end of the exhibit that you have for the slides. There's a list of references. These are all screenshots from published videos by mostly media outlets, television media mostly. Okay. So these are excerpted out of those videos.
And you've personally watched these videos?
I have, from start to finish. I've tried to select a few things that represent what I'm seeing rather than try to present all those videos, just to characterize these things, to get an idea of what they look like, what the scope of it is.
Okay. And as for relevance, what makes this line of testimony relevant to the current application?
I think it's relevant because it ties in with some of the expert testimony tonight from the Hamburg Fire Chief. This is demonstrating that solar fires can occur, and when they occur, they will emit toxic smoke. And it's something that has to be considered. I think it should be considered by the board that if we proceed with such a project, we definitely have to consider this as a risk and how it should be mitigated, especially in the context of residents living right next to this in some cases.
Okay. The objection is going to be overruled. The evidence will be admitted, and the board will give it its due and appropriate weight. Please proceed.
Okay. We can go to the next slide. This is the same rooftop. This is after the fire has been effectively put out. You can see, I think you can see, or at least appears to me, that the fire spread a little bit further than the initial photo that was captured in the video. You can see what the remnants of the solar panels look like. Next slide. There was a Fresno Fire Department incident report, and the cause of the fire was determined to be an undetermined electrical event. I think there's a mistype there by the news media or the fire report, but there's an extra "and" in there.
So the objection is sustained to the extent that there is hearsay statements being offered for the proof of the matter asserted.
We can go on to the next slide. Up top, yep. This is another commercial rooftop fire located in Newburyport, Massachusetts. This fire caused, according to the news report, $2 to $4 million in damages. You see an after the effect result there of the fire. Next slide. This is an example of a solar panel fire on a residential rooftop. This was a home in Melissa, Texas. Next slide. This was another commercial building rooftop fire in Prince George's County, Maryland.
Just to restate, just so that I have the same objections I placed on the first slide are the same for this.
The record is so noted as to your continuing objection. And you may proceed, Mr. Fowler.
So here you can see it looks like there's a lot of black smoke coming off of the fire. The flames seem to be rather vigorous. This is taken at a distance. Those solar panels are much larger than they appear because of the elevation. They're the typical size solar panels. Next slide. This is the fire after it has been substantially put out by firefighters. I think you can see here that there are maybe 3 groups of people. At the very top, there's a group of firefighters that are using what looks like some kind of water or spray, and then towards the right side of the screen, also firefighters that are tackling the fire from a different position. If you do watch the entire video, which is about 20 minutes long, you can see the actual deployment of the firemen. It takes a little bit of time to get up on these high roofs. And in the meantime, the fire did spread. Next slide. This was a solar roof fire at Albuquerque, New Mexico. This was on a community center building. It shows some flame, and you see some black smoke. Next slide. This is an aerial view of the same fire after it's been extinguished. I believe you can see some fire equipment still on the scene. And most of the damage is in the lower left quadrant of the building. All right, next slide. Hayward, California, commercial fire. There's a man standing at the bottom of the screen. It helps to give you a little bit of perspective of the size of the panels. And you can see some panels appear to be on fire, and there's a lot of black smoke. Next slide. This is actually the same fire after it's been put out. You see firefighters on the rooftop. It doesn't appear that this fire spread much beyond what it started at. It did not burn the whole roof. It was just a section. Next fire. Next slide, please. This is a fire. This looks like a fire at a solar farm. It has there's fire trucks already on the scene. They've substantially quelled it, but things are still smoldering a little bit. Next slide. That's melted vinyl fencing on the screenshot there. This place is next to a residential area, as we can see if we go to the next slide. You see that it did burn vegetation, and it did encroach on a home. It looks like there may be a couple of buildings there in the background. Next slide. This is a published news article stating that Amazon took all U.S. solar tops offline last year after a flurry of fires and electrical explosions.
Mr. Gallagher, what's the basis for your objection?
Hearsay.
What's your response?
It's a published article on CNBC's website.
Are you submitting this to show what's being reported in the media?
As an example of solar fires, yes.
Do you have any way of knowing if this is true or not true? It's not a commentary on the media. Just asking a question.
There's no way that I personally would know if it's true or not.
So you're just seeking to admit this for the purpose of of showing what's being reported in the media.
Right, and illustrating that
Yeah.
it appears that solar fires do occur.
Okay. The objection will be overruled, but again, the board will give it its due weight in their final analysis.
All right, next slide.
Same objection, Mr. Gallagher? Same ruling, overruled.
Same the last one as well.
Okay. Same ruling, overruled. Proceed. Sorry, it's 9:30. I'm trying to just move us along a little bit.
There's been some testimony about birds and migrating birds, and maybe a suggestion that solar farms aren't good for birds. Well, apparently birds aren't good for solar farms either. In this particular instance, we go to the next slide. According to the operator of that solar farm, California Valley Solar Ranch, they blamed that fire on an avian incident without saying what exactly happened. And the blaze damaged power poles and wires. This was a 250 megawatt plant, and it knocked out 84% of its generating capacity. About 1,000 acres were burned in the article, although I don't show that here. But this was published in the Los Angeles Times. And that's all I have.
Thank you. So now is the opportunity for cross-examination. Mrs. Palanek. No questions. Mr. Hartman, no questions. Mrs. Stabile. No questions. Mr. and Mrs. Yob. Mr. Balthaser.
No questions.
Mrs. Balthaser.
No questions.
Ms. Fowler. Members of the board, any questions?
Yes, I have a question, if you don't mind. Mr. Fowler, you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation here, by the way, I only had one semester of organic chemistry. That was enough. But you calculated here about 3 tons of cadmium. What does that mean? I mean, what health risk is that? Like, how do you quantify that amount of chemical or substance from a health standpoint? What's your? I mean, I didn't understand your point there. Where were you going? Where is that dangerous? Is 1 pound dangerous? How do you quantify that?
I would say that what I would say is that is a significant amount of cadmium. I believe there's been testimony that argues that cadmium telluride is a relatively safe material compared to cadmium. So the context that I'm explaining it is that this is a potential problem if there's a fire, because now you have temperatures in a fire that is high enough to cause the molecule to decompose and could possibly release cadmium. And it's 3 tons, but it's spread out over 400 acres. So if a small part of the field burns, there's less likely to be that much cadmium there. The whole field will have to burn to release 3 tons.
So does it go up and into the air, or does it fall into the ground?
It probably does a little of both, because you have the smoke, the black smoke, there's materials in that, and it's hot. So some of that cadmium could vaporize, it could oxidize. Also, you saw a lot of photos where there was debris on the rooftops from panels that have burned. So there would be presumably material on the ground as well, that there could be a leaching issue.
Okay. Well, while you were speaking, I looked this up online. I just Googled it, and I typed in health risks of cadmium. Breathing high levels of cadmium damages people's lungs and can cause death. Exposure to low levels of cadmium in air, food, water, and particularly in tobacco smoke over time may build up cadmium in the kidneys and cause kidney disease and fragile bones. Cadmium is considered a cancer-causing agent. So that's what I didn't know, if that's what you were going with or what part there.
I think you've summarized the concerns there, that the risks are well published, I would say. The fact that there's that much cadmium present combined with the risk of a fire means that there's a chance that some cadmium could end up being released in an emergency event, and it isn't a good material to have released.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Cluck. Mr. Gallagher.
Just a few, thank you. Mr. Fowler, with respect to the pictures that you testified to, I believe slides 13 through the end, did you personally visit any of these sites?
No.
Okay. Did you speak with anybody involved with any of these fires?
No.
You don't have any personal knowledge as to how they started?
No personal knowledge.
And you would agree that these are, for the large part, roof fires?
Correct.
Okay. And you're aware that this is not a rooftop system?
Yes.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Do you have any redirect?
No.
I don't think you did, but do you have a question? And if I did, I apologize. It was not intentional.
You may have said it and I missed it. I'm not sure. But my question is with the solar panels that are on fire, if they had cadmium in them, would it matter if they're on a roof or on the ground? If they're both on fire? Like, does it matter if they're on the roof or on the ground? Would the risk still be the same? Like for smoke?
I would think so. If they burn, there's going to be smoke released.
Object on, he's not qualified to render an opinion on this.
Well, you asked him about...
1 second, Ms. Fowler. So I think that he can give a lay opinion. I think that, and at this point, I'm going to overrule the objection. But again, the board is going to give this its due weight, and I think that your objection really goes more to the weight of the evidence as opposed to its admissibility. So you may answer the question.
I don't think it matters. There is, I think, a slightly greater risk if this occurs at ground level, because now you've got material on the ground which would be harder to clean up than if it was on a rooftop. Rooftop's a more controlled environment. You can clean that up maybe more effectively, but if it gets in the ground, you've got dirt down there, it gets all mixed in there, it could get more complicated, especially if you have bad weather.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher, I will give you the opportunity if you have any follow-up questions, because that was taken out of order.
I have no further questions.
Okay. And did you say you had redirect or you did not have redirect?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have your exhibits? There are 2, correct? Are you seeking to have those admitted and made part of the record?
Yes, and I think also we have a USB stick. Now that both Ms. Fowler and I have testified that both of our exhibits are on that USB stick as well.
So then you're seeking the admission of S. Fowler exhibits 1 and 2. Is the USB stick marked as an exhibit? So we should mark the USB as an exhibit. We'll mark that as S. Fowler 3. And so so the issue is, or the proposal is to make S. Fowler 1 through 3 part of the record. Are there any objections, Mrs. Polonic? No, and I got it wrong again. It's late. Mr. Hartman. Mrs. Stabile. No objections. Mr. and Mrs. Yob. No objections. Mr. Balthaser.
No objections.
Mrs. Balthaser.
No objections.
Ms. Fowler.
I have no objection, but I just want it noted
For the, I'm aware that your information is on there as well. I'm just for identification purposes, I'm going to mark it this way. Mr. Cluck, any objections? Mr. Gallagher.
Just to the extent that it's hearsay, the hearsay objections, same hearsay objections I made to Ms. Fowler's.
So noted. The objection is on hearsay, and the objection is so noted, and as I've indicated, the board will disregard any hearsay and will give the exhibit its due weight. Okay. Anything further, Mr. Fowler?
I'd just like to thank the board for allowing me to testify tonight.
At this time, I will ask the board to entertain a motion to adjourn this hearing in progress until April 3rd, 2024 at 6:00 p.m. here in the Hamburg area group instruction room at the Hamburg area high school. Again, that's going to be April 3rd, 2024 at 6:00 p.m.
Would someone make that motion? I'll make that motion. So I have a second. All in favor, say aye. Ayes have it.
Okay. We stand in recess.